I know I'm not going to be the first person to rank all 202 routes of Mario Kart World, but I like to think that I'm going to be among the most thorough. After months of meticulously taking notes on a spreadsheet that has honestly gotten way too unwieldy for its own good, I think I've finally come up with a ranking that I can be happy with. Now, the structure of this video is going to be a little bit different than a lot of other ranking videos, because after months studying these routes, I actually have a lot to say. If you're only interested in my final ranking, I won't be upset if you skip ahead, but I figure that this is going to be a long video no matter what I do, so we might as well buckle in and go all the way with this. So first, let's outline my criteria. I'm definitely more of a casual enjoyer of Mario Kart World, and this ranking is going to reflect that. I care about scenery, unique landmarks, and an overall sense of spectacle. I love when routes act as representatives of the tracks they're supposed to connect, making the world itself feel interconnected. I love seeing the destination looming overhead, or jumping onto the track from a completely unexpected angle. Yes, I'm taking into account how complex the driving is and how many opportunities there are to do tricks, but I'm also giving points for obstacles and enemies and the number of times we get to grab a snack from Yoshi's. At some points I've wondered if I've maybe overburdened myself by taking into account too many individual variables, but with so many routes to sort through, I do think these little details should be accounted for. I'm sure someone else's ranking might examine these routes from a competitive standpoint, while someone else might focus more on the moment-to-moment chaos in a lobby full of friends. This ranking is going to focus more on each route as a unique gameplay experience, and more importantly, how these routes relate to the world around them. But every journey needs a destination, so we'll be talking about the main tracks first, as everything worth saying about the individual routes is meaningless without the context the courses provide. And so as to not spoil the ranking at all, this part is going to be strictly alphabetical. I think Acorn Heights is one of the best destination tracks, and it's not just because it has a great final lap. It also serves as the pinnacle of the routes leading up to it in a way that feels appropriately climactic. Every one of its routes end up at the base of this giant tree, a respectable landmark whose roots serve as a nice funnel toward the starting line. 3 of these routes approach through this pond, but are otherwise completely unique from each other. The route from Mario Circuit features this wiggler section, the Dandelion Depths route is entirely downriver, and the route from Boo Cinema doesn't really have any major landmarks. Look, I said they're unique, not necessarily exciting. Out of these 3, I think the Dandelion Downriver has the best aesthetic identity and is generally the most fun to play on. But the Wiggler section is the one that encapsulates what Acorn Heights is supposed to be about. It's also the only route to feature Wigglers in any capacity, which is honestly a bit of a surprise. You'd think they'd be more of a presence. The other 2 routes, from Dry Bones Burnout and Toad's Factory, converge as they approach Acorn Heights, following the track itself up the tree. I do enjoy when routes do this, as it gives us just a bit of extra time to enjoy the scenery of the destination track. Unfortunately, that doesn't make up for the horrendous transition between biomes, which is one of the worst I have ever seen. What do I mean by that? Dry Bones Burnout takes place in this ashen wasteland, and suddenly, inexplicably, we're in this lush, magical forest. The liveliest, greenest part of the map, so lush that even the apples are giant. Contrast that against the cemeteries and the skeletons in the land of volcanic ash. They didn't even have the courtesy to cover it up with a gate or tunnel or whatever. It's a clear line in the grass where even the lighting changes from wax candles to fairy lamps. It's so lazy. Now I'm sure you're thinking, why does this matter? Well, part of why I started with Acorn Heights is to show you that there is a better way. When you're floating down the river from Dandelion Depths, you have this slow, gradual shift from one biome to the next. When we approach from Mario Circuit, these trees mark a clear entrance to a forest biome, and the generic green of Central Hyrule doesn't need to change its tone at all. Even the route from Boo Cinema is more natural, despite being a bit supernatural. We're going from one type of woods to another, and rather than an abrupt shift, we use this wooden log tunnel to take us from one kind of woods to the next. It's surprisingly thematically sound. This giant, dead tree is the perfect link between these 2 tracks. And besides, I can believe that a magical forest could exist on the border of a haunted forest. I really can't believe that the region of volcanic death and despair is somehow next-door neighbors to the land of flowers and plenty. What is this, some kind of Wednesday at HBO? So the river gets a lot of points for being natural. The generic Mario circuit gets a couple of points for being inoffensive, and the spooky log gets some extra points for creativity. The route from Dry Bones Burnout, meanwhile, loses points for being abrupt and lazy. Now, if you're starting at Acorn Heights, you end up with the same 5 routes again, taking the same exact path, but backwards. But it's not exactly the same experience. Descending the tree feels different, maybe because of the view, or maybe because you can do more tricks on the way down. I prefer descending things. Unfortunately, descending into a valley means driving uphill again later, which never feels quite as good, especially when there's a river involved. As for the rest of these routes, the halves that are not in the immediate vicinity of Acorn Heights, we'll cover those when we talk about their respective tracks. This is to keep things organized and generally avoid the redundancy of explaining every single route twice. Oh, and before we go, I want to address one little pet peeve of mine. This goddamn rolling start. Maybe it's controversial, but I like when my car is pointed forward when we hit go. If we start out driving in a straight line, I'm fine with that, but let's take Acorn Heights as an example of what not to do. For some reason, we take control of our vehicle halfway through this big, wide turn. It feels unnatural. It's even worse if you're heading toward the Dry Bones area, as Lucky 2 will torment us by dragging us around a second turn before giving us control. Maybe it's a small thing. Maybe I'm the only one on this godforsaken planet who cares. But I think it's worth deducting at least a couple of points, because it bothers me every single time it happens. Anyway, I hope you now understand the depths that I've gone to in trying to make this ranking. I see each route as an extension of the courses it's supposed to connect, so I will be judging them by that standard. And don't worry, you will get your numbered list eventually. Our second stop is Airship Fortress. There are 3 ways to approach this course: riding atop the castle walls, climbing the rubble just outside the castle walls, or launching up from a cannon in the desert. Each of these is special in its own right. If you're a fan of Knockout Tour, you're probably quite familiar with that desert entrance, which is exclusive to the route from Guy Bazaar. It's the only entrance to take us through the underbelly of the airship, a really cool section that doesn't show up in any other route. The second entrance is exclusive to the route from Wario Stadium, which you might have seen in the Flower Cup. This features the broken outskirts of the castle biome, giving off this war-torn impression. It implies that the Battle of Airship Fortress is just a snapshot of a much larger conflict, perhaps one that has been going on for a very long time. Environmental storytelling? In my Mario Kart game? The final entrance comes from atop the walls of Bowser's castle. Our connection here is historical. Airships have been loitering around castle property since Mario Bros. 3. Both areas give the sense of a climactic final showdown, which makes the transition feel really natural. If you're starting at Airship Fortress, you absolutely want to be heading north towards the castle. Like, for starters, look at that view. The explosions in the sky as you glide between flying warships makes for a bombastic entrance to the castle biome, which is itself a gorgeous backdrop. The route to Wario Stadium also has explosions and warships, but the scenery is just gray rubble, which somehow isn't quite as interesting as glowing smokestacks and shimmering pools of lava. And also, the rolling start here gives us another one of my pet peeves: starting a race in the middle of a glide. It feels so awkward to take control of a character in midair where your choices are so limited. It's like a worse version of a cutscene right before a QuickTime event. Maybe it looks cool to some people, but with the charge boost being negligible and steering being irrelevant, we aren't really playing the game until we touch down on the ground. I appreciate a sense of spectacle, but not if it means we don't get to play the game. And it gets even worse in the final exit, the route to Guy Bazaar. Not only does the cannon launch us into another gliding start, but funneling into the cannon is just so awkward and bumpy. Like, this is a serious contender for the most scuffed starting point in the entire game. Boo Cinema has the coolest concept for an ultimately mediocre track in Mario Kart history, and the routes just don't do enough to elevate the concept. Boo Cinema is surrounded by a swampy boardwalk, which is itself surrounded by a haunted forest. Someone out there loves the tight corners and the homage to classic Ghost Valley courses, but I think it's a weak representation of Boo Cinema. Yes, it's haunted, yes, it's spooky, and yes, there's ghosts. But for how distinct Boo Cinema actually is, the swamp feels kind of generic. Like you could associate it with literally any ghost-type track and it would still work. There's nothing cinema about the swamp, and there's nothing swampy about the cinema. Out of the 3 entrances to the boardwalk, the main entrance is definitely the strongest. This route, shared by Dandelion Depths and Mario Circuit, has the best overall feel to it. It has the longest haunted woods section in the game, and that section features some fantastic iconography, such as broken down trucks, ivy-covered fences, and gothic lampposts. The road itself has a nice stone brick texture that's unique to this particular neck of the woods. Everything comes together to feel like this idyllic setting for a horror movie. I say, as someone whose favorite piece of horror media is Over the Garden Wall. The boardwalk of this main entrance is less mechanically interesting than the other entrances, but it does give us a really good approach. It's the only entrance to face Boo Cinema head-on, which is really important for making that first impression. Courses in Mario Kart World should feel like significant points of interest, which means we should either be able to identify them from a distance, or we should recognize it for what it is the moment it comes into view. A good approach needs to build anticipation for the final lap, which is exactly what happens here. A simple turn of the corner reveals Boo Cinema, straight ahead in all its decrepit glory. Without this heads-on approach, the other entrances make Boo Cinema feel like a background element. Approaching from Acorn Heights or Bones Burnout feels super indirect, like the boardwalk detour is more important than the actual destination. Meanwhile, approaching from Starview Peak will give us this broken up path that just isn't quite facing the cinema. That's not to say these routes are bad. These 2 boardwalk sections have more interesting gameplay than some entire routes. But beyond having a weak approach, these routes don't fully capture the essence of cinema. We've talked about the dead log transition between Acorn Heights and Boo Cinema being thematically sound, bridging a vibrant forest with a haunted one, but we haven't talked about how boring this haunted woods section actually is. It's missing almost everything that made the main entrance special. There's no abandoned cars, the ground is now made of dirt, and the iconic gothic lampposts have been replaced with some kind of other street lamp? Like, why? You had such a good thing going for you. It does share the peepas, spiky fences, and foggy atmosphere with the main entrance, but there's nothing interesting about this particular stretch of road. I mean, I guess there's a moose? The Starview Peak entrance is even weaker when it comes to the Spooky Woods section, because it lasts like 10 seconds. At least I can respect the transition here. Like, we're going from a snowy peak down to a dead spooky swamp, but at least there's the sense of like, ominous cold going with it, right? Like, we will see so much worse from the snow transitions later on, I can at least respect this one. The reverse routes out of Boo Cinema follow more or less the same paths, but I find leaving Boo Cinema to be a lot less interesting than arriving. Visually, there's not nearly as much to look at, as the track is behind us now, and the swamp and forest are pretty drab. And from a gameplay perspective, wouldn't you rather start on a simple route and then end at the complex boardwalk, rather than starting on the complex boardwalk and then moving on to a simple route? It's just basic difficulty progression, right? Oh, and by the way, every route that starts at Boo Cinema has this awkward 2-point turn during the countdown, which just feels incorrect. Could Locky 2 really not think of a better place to start? Bowser's Castle is more than just a high-tier track hanging in the storm above a volcano. Bowser's Castle is an entire biome unto itself, stretching from the ruins beneath Airship Fortress to the lava pits around Bones Burnout. Just like Acorn Heights, this route has a funnel-style entrance, featuring different winding paths of the volcano depending on which route you are taking. Half the time, you'll be entering through the castle's front gate, which is a clean transition from the ashen wasteland that surrounds it. The main attraction here is Big Donut, which gives the castle a sense of regality and scale right before that branching volcanic ascent. Meanwhile, the route from Airship Fortress rides the castle walls and bridges the 2 courses so perfectly that it feels like we never left home. The final entrance to Bowser's Castle features what everyone unanimously calls the Fishbone Zone. Not only is this the place where you unlock everyone's favorite NPC racer, but it's also one of the more interesting water sections. Aesthetically, we're looking at a steamy lake surrounded by molten rocks, which is memorable enough on its own, but we're also faced with some interesting driving decisions. Do we take the upper lake or the lower lake? Do we try to get in as many tricks as possible by jumping between layers, or do we focus on straight lines? I love when the route design encourages players to spread out a little bit, and I love the trick opportunities that this unique terrain provides. There's not a lot of castle in this route, as the side entrance takes us directly to the volcano, but there's this consistent undercurrent of geothermal energy, which I just love. Every route out of Bowser's Castle follows the exact same path, and honestly, they cooked with this one. We do start in the middle of a glide section, which I hate, but then we get to trick our way down the mountain into another glide section, which I love, under one of these fiery monsters. He's called a Charvarg, by the way, which is different than a Blarg, if you even care. After the Charblarg, we return to Big Donut, which is now acting as a sort of crossroads, redirecting routes towards their respective courses. Normally, I prefer routes to have a bit more variety than this, so we're not constantly retreading the same ground, but I can make an exception for Bowser's Castle. This is indisputably one of the coolest starting sections in the entire game, so I can't really fault the devs for wanting to reuse it 6 times in a row. Cheep Falls is iconic, boasting arguably the most exciting water driving out of any track, but that doesn't guarantee its routes will live up to its legacy. Most of them converge at this pond at the front entrance, and 5 of those reek of disappointment. These routes follow the same underwhelming path through the autumn biome, which is so mind-numbingly generic that the devs had to throw in an endangered species to make things interesting. Yes, Super Koopas made their first reappearance in any Mario game since Mario Bros. 3 first released back in 2010, and don't fact check me on that one because it's probably not true. These enemies fly harmlessly overhead and drop feathers that you can bounce on, which is interesting, I guess, but not exactly useful. They're not exclusive to this route, and there's no thematic justification for what they're doing here. Honestly, I think they're only here because they're orange. They don't really fit in with the hanging lanterns or bamboo fences that reflect the Japanese inspiration of this area, and even those elements feel like a bare minimum here. The shifting seasons can also be a little bit jarring. One minute you're on a summery coast, and the next moment you're in the middle of autumn. At least the winter routes pass through a tunnel to get here, and honestly, I can respect autumn and winter being right next to each other because, they're neighboring seasons in real life. It's a nice ray of intentionality in an otherwise underwhelming route. The route from far Away Oasis is a lot better, focusing on this nice scenic riverside drive. It's a really gentle transition, the colors imperceptibly shifting between similar shades of yellow and orange. Peach Stadium, Moo Meadows, and Choco Mountain transition with a sudden swim through Cheep Pond, which is a bit abrupt, but is also one of my favorite segments. The pond itself is nothing special, but it's a rare treat for a route to have such a clear thematic through line with its destination. All 9 routes convene in this aesthetically pleasing straightaway. The 4 better routes get to enjoy this stretch for its entire length, while the 5 Koopa Cape routes cut across this bridge to join up with us at the last second. But they were all of them deceived, for there was another, a 10th route to Cheep Falls, which put all the rest to shame. Dandelion Depths gives us something truly special, throwing us over the waterfall and right into the fray. The river gives us a fantastic aesthetic through line between the route and destination track, and this jump lets us play an extra half lap of Cheep Falls, which is more than any other route is going to let us get away with. This entrance is peak, no more, no less. With 9 out of 10 routes using the same entry point, you might expect the reverse routes to have a similar creative deficiency, but actually you'd be wrong. There are 3 different starting points at Cheep Falls, each heading in a different direction. The first one is the most obvious, driving back across the starting line and down to the rocky pond. Only 4 routes start this way: Faraway Oasis, Peach Stadium, Salty Speedway, and Wario Shipyard. The route back to Peach Stadium is the only one to retread that cheap pond I liked so much from earlier, as the other pond routes found a completely different path home. The Salty Speedway route is also completely different, reflecting the mechanics of Cheep Falls by riding the river down to the next course. The second entrance is this bridge section, which does drag us through an awkward turn and a bump in the road, but also treats us to some unique scenery with these fancy kites. Both routes that start here take us into the winter biome, though only Starview Peak uses this tunnel to hide the biome transition. The route to DK Pass doesn't actually do anything to hide the transition between areas, but maybe it deserves a pass for being a thematic changing of the seasons. The final exit is the most awkward of the three, featuring two sharp swerves that lead to some really weird jostling, but at least this leads us to an otherwise unique part of the map. The route to Choco Mountain features this peaceful autumn countryside, which is a pleasant way to say goodbye to the Cheep biome. The routes to Moo Depths and Dandelion Meadows follow the switchback up this hill, where the tree colors slowly fade from orange to yellow, making for the smoothest possible transition into the next biomes. You can also see more Super Koopas on some of these routes, though it makes you wonder why these so-called heroes are doing nothing to stop Lucky 2's nefarious meddling. I don't want to talk about Choco Mountain. I rank it pretty low. Probably lower than it deserves, being the only track shaped like a monster truck. It's just, everything looks like mud to me. If you want good-looking chocolate, go to Sky High Sundae. That off-road reminds me of Haagen-Dazs, and this video's not sponsored by Haagen-Dazs, but if Haagen-Dazs wants to sponsor me, my Blue Sky DMs are open, so please. The connecting routes are pretty boring here. You'd be forgiven for not noticing that there are two separate chocolate lakes on either side of the course. Their shapes are a little different from each other, but the main difference is that one of them has a lot of colorful blocks in the middle, while the other has a few colorful blocks on the outside. This is groundbreaking level design, ladies and gentlemen. I do give bonus points whenever there's a split path around the lake, as it helps break up the pack a little bit and make the driving more interesting. But aesthetically, the Choco biome is like a bottom 3 area for me, which is why the best entrance to Choco Mountain completely skips over the biome and throws you right onto the track. It's a surprisingly natural shift. As it turns out, you can dig a muddy hole pretty much anywhere, and it would still make sense. Choco Mountain typically hides its biome transitions with this little bump in the road between cliffs. It's nice to have a clear boundary when we're shifting biomes so suddenly, but I prefer when it's accompanied by the gradual shift we get when driving between Choco Mountain and Arizona. The color palette is what really sells it. The mountains off to the side stay brown and orange, and the off-road dirt is just a few shades separated from the off-road dirt from the previous section. It's a blink and you miss it transition, which really only works because the mountains are doing so much work to keep things consistent. Anyway, this is the part where I might talk about the starting line or reverse routes or whatever, but I decided that if I don't have anything particularly interesting to say about any given element of a route, I'm just gonna skip over it. This video's long enough as it is. Crown City has some of the best diversity when it comes to routes, since different routes will lead to different final laps. If you've played the Mushroom Cup, you're probably already familiar with the most common entrance, which comes from all 4 desert tracks. The red Arizona wasteland suddenly becoming grassy coastline will always feel a little bit suspect, but they do make up for it by ending with Crown City's second lap, easily the best one. There's just so much spectacle in climbing up these solar panels and launching through the city's crown. But if you want something a little more unique, the routes from Moo Meadows, Peach Stadium, and Choco Mountain showcase a secret 4th lap of Crown City. It looks a little bit like the end of lap 3, but it features this beachside water section that never shows up in the standard Crown City track. It's a really cool way to flesh out sections of a city that wouldn't otherwise be getting any attention. And if you happen to hate water sections, like I know some of you do, good news. This one is less than 10 seconds long. You can stomach it. If you approach from Away Oasis, Koopa Troopa Beach, or DK Spaceport, you end up playing on a sort of partial reversed version of lap 1, which takes you through the graffiti-filled back alleys of the city. It's a fun enough lap on its own, but when I think about graffiti-filled back alleys, I can't help but think about Wario Stadium, the other track to be associated with graffiti. Wario Stadium has a route to Crown City, so you might think these two would be a perfect thematic pair, but no. Wario Stadium's route leads to the solar panel section, probably because all desert tracks use the exact same entrance to the city. If they'd cared at all about thematic consistency, they could have easily made an exception to these desert entrances, giving Wario Stadium its own unique path through the city to focus on the graffiti. DK Spaceport had a unique entrance to Crown City, so why not Wario? Starting a route in Crown City feels a lot different than starting a route at any other track, and I think it's because there's still so much city to see. The route back to Choco Mountain and Moo Meadows takes us right through the endlessly modest covered roads. There's a nice seaside view, but the traffic is what reminds us that we're still in the heart of civilization. The route to Peach Stadium mostly follows this path too, except it has a unique starting line in the heart of the city, which is probably just meant to extend the race by 20 seconds. The route back to the desert starts on this pier and awkwardly splits the drivers up on opposite sides of this middle rail. The lineup is still straight, so maybe we just call this one quirky? I do like having a little bit of city driving before we hit Arizona, but this is probably the least interesting section they could have chosen. Even if you're a big rails in the road believer, like I am, the Peach Stadium route through Crown City just does it better. The exit that takes us to DK Spaceport and Whistle Stop Summit definitely feels the most unique, showing off a really nice view and a rarer part of the city that doesn't get nearly as much attention as the others. The route back to faraway Oasis is the same, forwards and backwards, putting a massive spotlight on the iconic Crown Bridge. This serves both as a fantastic landmark and also, arguably, the best traffic section in the entire game. Meanwhile, heading to Koopa Troopa Beach starts us on a completely different pier, dragging us into the water right before we hit go, which surprisingly doesn't even bother me that much. But what I really respect is how much extra time some of these routes spend in the city itself. Several of them start or end with a partial lap through the city, which means you could theoretically spend most of lap 2, all of lap 3, and then most of lap 1 of the next course exploring the same location. If every track extended its influence as zealously as Crown City does, routes would feel less like long stretches of empty road and more like brief jaunts between significant points of interest. Dandelion Depths is interesting because you can pass right over it and not even realize you're there. That's because this course is essentially two unrelated aesthetics. There's the glowing blue cavern below and the red iron construction above. Parabitty construction, they call it. And yet, I have never seen these parabitties so much as lift a hammer. It's probably for the best though. Any more progress on whatever they're building, and they risk causing permanent damage to this natural wonder. And then where would we drive? Most routes enter through the construction on top of the biome, which means those same routes exit through the top too, which kinda sucks because the top side doesn't feature the Dandelion Depths at all. Other routes pass by here and you'd be forgiven for not realizing that there's a whole world under the surface. The spores in the air are the only hint that there's anything dandelion about this area. There are also red towers and metal pipes to play up the construction aspect of this course, but that's not really the aesthetic that people are taking away from Dandelion Depths. There's a reason it's not called Parabitty Heights. Now, if we really want to find a way to connect the surface to the underground, we could say that these rock formations were probably created by the same watery erosion that also created the massive underground cavern. It isn't much, but it is a nice little nod to the real-world concept of geology. And even if I think this is a pitiful reflection of what Dandelion Depths is as a track, I do enjoy this section on its own merits. The road is twisty, the rock formations are memorable, and the yellowish tint to the grass helps this place stand out from the more generic greens of the map. Though obviously, the routes that exit through Dandelion Depths are just so much better. Desert Hills treats us to 2 wide turns and a couple of contours. That's it. That's all we get of the desert before we smash cut into Arizona. It's like the devs wanted to spend as little time here as possible, and I don't blame them. This desert is boring. That is, unless you're on the route to Shy Guy Bazaar. This route is completely different from the other 4 and includes 2 unique sections. First, you have a nice torchlit cave. And second, you find yourself gliding over a field of sandworms, which you might recognize from the Flower Cup. I guess it shouldn't be a surprise that they saved the only good Desert Hills route for the Grand Prix. Incidentally, the route back from Shy Guy Bazaar is the only one to end with a normal, full lap of Desert Hills. The other 4 make you play on the reverse version, which would be cool and unique if they weren't all blatantly copying each other's homework. Dino Jungle knows how to make a first impression. Every route features some dinosaur, whether it's a T-Rex, a Triceratops, or even one of these giraffes. Multiple routes drive through this section where the paths split between the trees, but depending on which route you're taking, the dinosaurs are going to be different. The route from Koopa Troopa Beach is interesting because it enters the track backwards, taking us through this exclusive path around the track's outskirts before landing us right back on the intended path. Fun fact, alongside Peach Stadium, this is the only time you will ever see dash food in the final lap of the course. Starting at Dino Jungle tends to rub me the wrong way. Stumbling over these geysers as we awkwardly jostle into something resembling a proper starting lineup, it just feels bad. Minus 3.5 points for each of you. Except the route to Koopa Troopa Beach once again proves its desire to be unique. We head toward the starting line facing the correct direction this time, which means these geysers, which were so awkward on the other routes, are now a fun little trick opportunity to start the race off on a high note. The biome transitions are generally pretty good here. This cave takes us between the two different jungle types, which barely feels like a transition at all. The border between the savanna and the jungle is marked with this broken fence, which is a cute nod to the rampaging dinosaurs that are about to wreck the entire savanna ecosystem. Meanwhile, the transition from the jungle to the beach has no negative ecological implications, so congrats on that one, I guess. Finally, this giant waterfall is a super memorable landmark that almost helps us forget that it's technically part of the savanna biome, so what's it doing here, but we'll talk more about that later. DK Pass is this game's obligatory snow track. The level design is admittedly pretty good, but the course itself feels just a little bit too generic. And for as obligatory as the main course feels, the connecting routes feel even more so. By far the best are the routes from Starview Peak and Sky High Sunday, which take this perfectly on-theme snowboarding section that's a little bit reminiscent of Mount Wario. The other routes in comparison are pretty average. I like the snowy countryside and log cabins when approaching from Dandelion Depths, and I like the grand landscape view when approaching from Cheep Falls, but these feel like pleasant snow routes that could lead to any winter track. Meanwhile, the coastal routes feel entirely uninspired. The shift into the snowy biome is completely abrupt, though that's usually how it goes with snowy routes. And here, the routes don't even take advantage of the winter theme. We get one giant snowball rolling down the mountain. But this idea is never built upon, and before you know it, we're already at the main track. The only landmark here is a distant sign for DK Pass, framed perfectly by the mountains, but not giving any substance to the route itself. But even though I don't particularly like the coastal routes, I do have to give them a bit of credit for ending with a reverse lap of DK Pass. This reverse lap is rare enough that it still feels like a novelty, but it also feels designed well enough that a backwards lap feels just as good as driving forward. The coastal routes have much better scenery on the way back down, where the transition is still bad, but the view is good. The path to Cheep Falls is completely different from its opposite counterpart, featuring this cute little river crossing that doesn't get nearly enough love. The path back to Starview Peak has a really roundabout way of getting us back on the ski slope, and the path back to Sky High Sunday cuts past the ski slope entirely. It's a bit of a shame because, the ski slope is the best part. Generally speaking, I think all of these routes would be a lot better if they had a stronger sense of identity. But in this case, DK Pass being so generic has somewhat hindered what its routes are able to do. But you don't want to pass on DK Spaceport. Part of what makes this course interesting is the asymmetrical number of routes. Only 3 approach this course, which would be a record low if it weren't for Rainbow Road only connecting to Peach Stadium. But unlike Rainbow Road, DK Spaceport is the starting point for a whopping 6 connecting routes. This is almost certainly due to DK Spaceport itself being a super long track. It can afford to drive an extra long route to reach the distant desert hills, but starting at Desert Hills would make DK Spaceport feel much longer than normal. Whistle Stop Summit and Crown City approach from pretty much the same angle and don't leave a lot to write home about. This vibrant pine tree area does feel a bit unique, but it doesn't reflect DK Spaceport at all. By process of elimination, Koopa Troopa Beach ends up being the most unique out of the 3, approaching from the bay and taking us through the Spaceport's lower level. Leaving DK Spaceport tends to be a little disappointing. Most of these routes turn right back into the pine forest, which is inoffensive, but as noted before, not particularly representative of what DK Spaceport is all about. However, when we take a right, we not only revisit the rocket's underbelly, but we also get a fond farewell from the DK robot and the giant barrels he's trying to crush us to death with. Weirdly enough, when that recent update dropped that changed all the Koopa Troopa beach routes to be more interesting, this area was affected too. Nothing changed structurally here, but there are some more ramps and boost panels to make things go along quicker. But these changes don't show up if you're driving to Peach Stadium. They only show up if you're driving to Koopa Troopa Beach, and it kinda makes you wonder why. Dry Bones Burnout is incredible, just a fantastic course all around. But surely you remember how much I hate its transition to Acorn Heights? You know, the land of the dead bordering on the forest of plenty. Fortunately, the other routes are just so much better. The castle biome is already full of lava, and despite not being dry at all, the Fishbone Zone is very obviously dry bones coated. You would think that Mario Circuit and Moo Meadows would have the same transitional issues as Acorn Heights, but it's actually not so bad here. There's a river that's acting as a clean barrier between biomes, so this bridge ends up feeling the same as like a gate or tunnel. Just don't pay attention to the patches of green that are on the wrong side of the river for literally no reason. Like, it defeats the entire point of the hard barrier between biomes, and you'd never notice it if you weren't looking for it, so why is it there? There's one more transition that I haven't really talked about yet, but I did allude to it earlier. The route between Dry Bones Burnout and Boo Cinema. You would think this route would be a thematic slam dunk. Both tracks are based on undead enemies, and both biomes have this haunted, gray aesthetic. But actually, these biomes are nowhere near each other. In order to get from one course to the next, we have to pass through the completely unrelated Acorn Heights biome. It's this weird tonal whiplash that just makes you wonder why. But whatever. Entering Dry Bones Burnout through the front lets us trick off this wall and into a glide, which is a great way to start the final lap. Routes from Acorn Heights and Boo Cinema don't quite have the right angle to hit this trick, but they do still use that same entrance. Only Airship Fortress enters from a completely unique side angle, which isn't particularly game-changing, but does put more focus on all the piping hot soup that surrounds the course. I'm not a fan of the bump and swerve that comes with the most common starting line, and the route to Airship Fortress has us starting in the middle of a turn, which you already know that I don't like. The route toward Acorn Heights and Boo Cinema probably has the least offensive starting line, since while it does have a turn, the lineup straightens out before the race actually begins, so I'm not penalizing it nearly as badly as the others. Away Oasis is a middling track that relies too much on its connecting routes to fully explore its Savannah theme. The thumbnail suggests wild animals, but the only animals on the track are relegated to the sidelines. Fortunately, every connecting route to and from Away Oasis features wild animals to some extent, whether it be zebras, ostriches, brachiosaurs, or even this one awesome alligator. Most routes enter through the front, but 3 use what I like to call the cool entrance, where you take a ramp onto the waterfall at the end of the track. There are other distinct moments on these routes, but for the most part, the scenery all kinda blends together. Like, if your most exciting landmark is a bridge, you're not exactly breaking the mold. Wait, no, Crown Bridge, I didn't mean it like that. No, you're great, you're not like the other bridges. Come back! There are some scattered elements reminiscent of the main track, wooden pathways, rope bridges, miscellaneous water sections, but the wildlife remains the most interesting thing about any of these routes. And honestly, driving alongside a herd of zebras or dodging around elephants in the road is just fun. The transitions into the Savannah biome can be a bit sudden, but they're not all bad. It makes sense, for example, that the Savannah is bordering on the jungle. The route to Cheep Falls is a very gentle shift between similar colors, and Crown Bridge is long enough to justify taking us pretty much anywhere it wants to go. The most jarring transitions take us out onto the coastline, but even these are nicely obscured by a narrow path with a small jump. Finally, the route to Peach Stadium is so abrupt and so visually cluttered that it circles back around into being confident. Though on the way back, it's just abrupt. Son, I think you're old enough for us to have a talk about that great mysterious question mark block in the sky. Great Question Block Ruins is where Mario goes when he dies, and it's also one of the coolest new courses in the game. It's so visually distinct, it's a shame you can't really see it from anywhere. Despite being one of the highest points in the map, it's always a vague shadow hanging overhead, which no man can fully comprehend until he stands at its gates. I can respect these design choices as poignant references to the unknowable nature of the afterlife, but I'd honestly preferred if they'd made it into a recognizable landmark, sorta like Starview Peak or Bowser's Castle's volcano. I don't know if there were technical limitations or what, but it is kind of a shame that this big open world only has 1 or 2 landmarks you can see from a distance. But at least the connecting routes know how to set the tone. All 4 pass through this ruinous jungle before crossing some sunken blocks and launching up into the sky. The jungle sections that follow the beach tracks are a little bit boring, but the routes from Dino Dino Jungle and Faraway Oasis both have unique segments that do a much better job encapsulating the theme of the upcoming course. These routes are mostly the same forwards as they are backwards, but with the added cringe of taking control of your car in the middle of a glide section. Yes, I am still annoyed by that. But the route to Faraway Oasis takes us on a unique path down this river and over the Dino Dino Falls. It's not my favorite downriver route, but I do like the fallen blocks, and I love that we're approaching the giant waterfall from a completely different angle than before. This is exactly the sort of thing this game needs more of, significant landmarks that different routes will approach from unique directions. There's also a one-way route to Koopa Troopa Beach, though it's not entirely clear why it couldn't also go the other way. I mean, we all end up there eventually anyway, right? And speaking of Koopa Troopa Beach, that's our next stop alphabetically. This is universally regarded as one of the worst tracks in the game, and for good reason. It's just a circle. Where's the plot? Where's the intrigue? That being said, I could never bring myself to hate the Koopa Troopa Beach routes. A lot of people have criticized these water sections for being too straight and boring, and while I see that argument, I've always liked the variety that these particular routes bring. The constant tricking off the waves and the decision-making that goes into navigating these open areas is more interesting to me than just a long stretch of dry land. Sure, this gameplay is a little reminiscent of Excite Bike Arena, one of my least favorite courses of all time, but at least a connecting route has a reason to be a long, straight line. But that was before the December update. Yeah, halfway through editing this massive video, Nintendo decided to victimize me, personally, by completely retooling the Koopa Troopa routes, and thereby messing up the entire ranking. Everything in the West Bay is completely different, adding in dolphins and twists and turns and visual clutter, all in an effort to make these routes more interesting. And I gotta say, they pulled it off. They build on everything that made the water routes good in the first place, and the coolest part to me is that, since these elements are just floating out there in the water, the devs were able to design a unique layout for each route with no concern for whether it would work in the opposite direction. But fixing a couple of routes is not the only issue that this update addressed. Koopa Troopa Beach has always been criticized for being a really anticlimactic finale. After all, it is one short lap around a small circle, and it's just not very exciting. They fixed this by giving us 2 laps of Koopa Troopa Beach, which is better, I suppose, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still a really boring track. Like, should we be happy that the devs listened and made the destination track longer? Or should we be sad because now we have to play on 2 laps of Koopa Troopa Beach? Anyway, there are 8 routes that use Koopa Troopa Beach as a destination, but only 5 use it as a starting point, which is kind of a shame because I would always rather start at Koopa Troopa Beach than have to end there. And even with the updates, I don't think these routes do a great job representing what Koopa Troopa Beach is all about. Like, yes, there's water, but the choppy waves on the route are nothing like the calm shallows of the main track. This sandbar is made of the same sand as the main track, I suppose, but the aesthetics here are just pretty weak. And a lot of that is because Koopa Troopa Beach doesn't have a super strong identity. Like, maybe it's asking a lot from the worst course in the game, but couldn't the devs have done a little bit more to make these routes stand out? There's a beach party going on, so why not build this theme up across the routes? Like, some routes brought balloons, but they're barely noticeable and, notably, not consistent. Oh, and the routes on the east side were completely unchanged during the update. I guess this cute little pier was good enough as is. Mario Bros. Circuit is the signature track of Mario Kart World, but in a way that is inextricably tied to the broader landscape that surrounds it. The course itself is no more iconic than the wide open highway that leads to Crown City. This route was our first impression of the game, and it was the centerpiece of this game's marketing. That being said, it's probably a good thing that this route is so exclusive. When people complain about long, empty stretches of highway, This is probably the exact route that comes to mind. I don't think it's as egregious as other people might make it out to be, but I do think limiting our exposure to this particular section does help it feel special. But special isn't a word I would use to describe most of the routes leading to Mario Bros. Circuit. Despite having so many routes to choose from, the landscape sort of blends into itself after a while. At best, you get like one landmark, and then you gotta be happy with it because the rest of the route is just a sea of red rock. A stone ocean, if you will. The Armadillo Junction, which I named because I found it first, is probably the most memorable area, as it shows up in something like 10 desert routes. If you're crazy like me and play through 202 routes back to back, this area starts to feel a little bit repetitive. But if you're just playing casually, I think it's nice to have a consistent landmark that helps you keep your bearings. Incidentally, approaching from this junction gives us a nice slick moment where we turn the corner to see Mario Bros. Circuit sitting there waiting for us, like a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. I mentioned it before with Boo Cinema, but not every track is able to achieve this sheer level of presence. This narrow canyon is pretty cool too, and it's a bit of a convergence point for Toad's Factory and Wario Stadium. But once they meet up with the route from Choco Mountain, it's another generic Arizona without any real identity or connection to the main track. There's a diner sign and maybe some tires on the side of the road, but is this really what passes for representation these days? Almost every one of these routes ends with a reversed lap around Mario Bros. Circuit, which has some novelty the first time, but is never my first choice when trying to play on this track. The course is designed to end with this split path, which isn't complicated but adds some variety in decision making to the race's final moments. There's no gameplay equivalent to this when you enter the track backwards. And it's not just a one-time gimmick, it's almost every single route. It's the same problem as Desert Hills actually. When every route is backwards, the forwards route becomes the treat. And coincidentally, just like Desert Hills, the only way to end with a forward-facing destination track is to take the route from Shy Guy Bazaar. Though as we'll see later, Shy Guy Bazaar loves being the outlier. There aren't any real key landmarks on this route, and it's the only one that doesn't have a great view of its destination, but it's also the only route brave enough to ask, what if a wide, 4-lane straightaway through Arizona had curves? The biome transitions are generally pretty good, as most of these routes are either entirely in Arizona or pass from one desert to another. It's only awkward when we're driving to Toad's Factory or Crown City, and the grass just suddenly happens for no reason. Finally, only 3 of these routes have an awkward starting line that bothers me. The rest of them are totally fine. But Mario Bros. Circuit isn't the only Mario Circuit in this game. We also have Mario Circuit. 3 of the most generic tracks in Mario Kart history, mashed together into one super track that is as average as the total average of all of its parts. I don't really respect the 3-track gimmick, and neither do the devs apparently, since only one route will take us through all 3 laps. Maybe they saved it for the Special Cup in an attempt to make it feel more special, but it just makes the other routes to Mario Circuit feel less interesting in comparison. This is especially noticeable when you approach from Boo Cinema. It's the same entrance that the Special Cup uses, but instead of playing the full track, we only get 1 lap, which is only marginally more interesting than Koopa Troopa Beach. Section 2 is much more interesting, and probably my favorite standalone lap of Mario Circuit. The 3rd section is fine, I suppose, but don't blame me if I'm not excited about Mario Circuit 3 again. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Miyamoto was buried with a copy of Mario Circuit 3 in his hands. Most routes leading to Mario Circuit converge with another route at some point, which is actually pretty normal for routes in the center of the map. Dry Bones Burnout and Bowser's Castle converge in the Ashlands, and Starview Peak piggybacks off the Dandelion Depths route. But what's interesting to me is how Moo Meadows and Toad's Factory meet up and then split right before the actual track starts. They follow the same path right up until the track is in sight, and then they diverge into completely different entrances. This is the only example of something like this happening in the entire game, and why? Well, I think they just wanted an even number of tracks to end with sections 2 and 3. It's really not that deep. But it just goes to show that even the devs think Mario Circuit 1 is a bad destination track. They made it as rare as Rainbow Road so we wouldn't have to play on it. As for the reverse routes, I really respect the ones that drive on Mario's circuit. It's a really nice way to represent the track that we're leaving behind, even if that track is a little bit more generic than your average Mario Maker level. And yes, I do have to forgive Locky2 for dragging us around yet another corner. It's definitely not ideal, but it's worth the trade-off to start in the middle of the track. It's better than Locky2 dragging us around the outskirts of the track, that's for sure. Unfortunately, there's not much else to say about these routes. Mario's circuit mainly expresses itself through colorful blocks in an otherwise plain grass biome, which is something, I suppose, but it's really not that exciting. Being a blank slate in the middle of the map isn't such a bad thing. It allows for smooth transitions into other biomes, but on its own, the Mario circuit locale just isn't anything interesting. Now, if you really want a boring central green area that has at least a little bit more flavor, might I introduce you to Moo Meadows. And I know, Moo Meadows isn't exactly thrilling. It's been on every home console since the Wii, and it's really just a farm with cows. But despite not being very interesting as a landmark, it actually fits this game's vision pretty well. What's a road trip without farmland? Miles and miles of cows and corn stretching out in every direction. It's the universal road trip experience. You have to drive through Nebraska or it doesn't count. Just like Bowser's Castle, Moo Meadows has become a biome unto itself, but unlike Bowser's Castle, this area feels grounded and a bit more realistic. It's a calm, laid-back countryside, which might not be exciting, but it does feel necessary. Not every destination can be as explosive as Airship Fortress, so it's nice that courses like Moo Meadows can slow things down a little bit. Unfortunately, this means the routes leading into Moo Meadows tend to be a little bit bland. The only thing about this biome that really sticks out is the cows, and they aren't even a consistent presence. The route from Crown City features toad houses and cows. The route from Choco Mountain features no toad houses, but yes cows. The route from Cheep Falls is a long, winding approach, but no cows. The route from Toad's Factory has cows, but nothing else. And the route from Peach Stadium has no cows. And I wish there were more to talk about, but Moo Meadows really is the cows level, so I can really only judge the surrounding routes based on their levels of cow. We can access a reversed Moo Meadows if we start at Peach Stadium or Cheep Falls, which is a bit of a novelty, but I much prefer the secret back entrance that takes us right through the barn in the middle of the track. Driving through hidden areas is one of the best things a route can give us, so I've got to give credit whenever it happens. Out of the 4 routes that use this northern entrance to cut through the barn, Dandelion Depths and DK Pass are by far the weakest. There's a complete lack of cows, which is especially embarrassing when they use the same entrance as Bones Burnout in Mario's Circuit, who have a surplus of cows. When I was talking earlier about how forgettable and bland the Moo Meadows routes tend to be, I was intentionally excluding this one, as this is probably the best visual representation of what Moo Meadows is supposed to be about. It's a meadow filled with cows. Most of the return routes are exactly what you'd expect, though there are a couple of differences. The route to Cheep Falls is completely new, taking us through some unique farmland that still doesn't have cows. And instead of taking us back through the barn, the 4 northern routes follow the main track up to the exit. Once again, using the track as part of the route always feels better than just leaving it behind unceremoniously. Obviously, gliding over the meadow was going to be a one-way deal, but driving back through the meadow is surprisingly satisfying. Seeing the same route from 2 different angles just helps the world feel fleshed out. Now, as for the starting lines, none of them are perfect. Even the best ones have the slightest turn at the end of their straightaway, which is mildly annoying. But these hills are egregious. You barely notice them in a normal race, but they're such a sore thumb when they're part of the starting lineup. They're lumpy, they're asymmetrical, and they make you wish the race had started like 20 feet back so we could avoid this awkward drag. In some ways, Peach Beach is the weirdest track in the game. It's a retro track, but they've also added 2 brand new laps, making it play a lot like Crown City or Mario Circuit. But unlike those tracks, you're getting the exact same experience no matter which route you take. And it's never the retro lap that you're probably expecting when you think of Peach Beach. Instead, every route ends with laps 2 and 3 back to back, which sounds exciting until you realize that it's basically just one big lap. And while the first half is fun, the second half somehow manages to be the worst water route in the game. There aren't many obstacles, the water is too smooth for tricks, and the driving is just one big U-turn that doesn't feel very good. That being said, a bad water route is still more interesting than the long, boring sandbar you have to take to get here. It's just this wide, sandy straightaway that makes for a really anticlimactic approach to an otherwise beautiful destination. Sure, the Cataquacks are on theme, but they're basically the replacement for the one lap of Peach Beach we never get to play. It's not quite as bad driving in the other direction, but that's just because a boring start is more forgivable than a boring end. 4 out of 5 routes use this sandbar, by the way. The one that doesn't use the sandbar is actually pretty strong overall. The choppy, treacherous waters of Wario Shipyard gradually give way to this nice tropical island imagery. It's a nice change of pace from the generic coastal biome that so many other routes rely on. Too bad about that last bit though, where the placid water leaves us with yet another boring straight line. And that brings us to Peach Stadium, one of the best and worst tracks in the game, depending on which route you take to get there. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. That simple rectangle that figuratively and literally is hidden in the shadow of a much better track. It's a shame because I really like the aesthetic. Both entrances, east and west, are a part of a lovely pink biome that really stands out from the generic hilltop layer that makes up the center of the map. It reminds me of Hatsune Miku for some reason. The traffic here actually serves a thematic function, emphasizing Peach Stadium's role as a transportation hub. There's so much to like about this track, until, of course, you get to the rectangle. It really feels like it's supposed to be building up to something, like maybe you do the lower lap and then climb up to the actual Peach Stadium right above us. But no, we can't have a race last more than 4 minutes. What if the babies at the daycare get bored? For how bad the final lap is, it really shouldn't be a surprise that all of these routes are best experienced going in the other direction, where you can enjoy the scenery knowing that you're not going to have to race on the rectangle again. If you want to play on the actual good Peach Stadium, you're going to want to approach this track from the north or south. The northern tracks follow this star-shaped lake, a landmark that's surprisingly easy to miss without a map. These routes enter through a nice little courtyard with a chain chomp, and then provide us boost panels to take us into the actual worthwhile final lap. But if the courtyard doesn't suit your fancy, or if you're just deathly afraid of chain chomps, you can always approach from the south. Yes, Koopa Troopa Beach gets a lot of flack for having boring water routes, but you gotta at least respect the stylish architecture launching us onto the main track. This entrance is also used by the often overlooked DK Spaceport route, a one-way joyride of every gimmick the open water routes have to offer. It's twice as long as the route you would take from Koopa Troopa Beach, but it's also more than twice as interesting, really leaning into every bit of spectacle that a water route could provide. So the route from DK Spaceport is fantastic. Cut that in half and you get the route to Koopa Troopa Beach, which is less than half as good. We cut that in half and what do we get? Peach Stadium to Rainbow Road, which is conveniently the next course alphabetically. Yes, this route is pretty much exactly the same as Peach Stadium to Koopa Troopa Beach, except it's half as long. But despite their obvious similarities, people tend to rank these courses completely differently from each other, and I just can't agree with that. Of course, Rainbow Road is a better destination than Koopa Troopa Beach, but if we're judging the routes, we can't just pretend that this first section is top tier sometimes and bottom tier others. The only tangible difference between these two routes is how these yellow flotation devices are set up. And let's be totally honest, most of you would never have noticed the difference. And if you did, you would probably agree with me that Koopa Troopa Beach has the more interesting layout. That being said, Rainbow Road does have a leg up when it comes to aura. It always takes place at night, adding some really nice contrast to the colorful light show that graces the seas and skies. It's amazing how just a little bit of flavor can make the most unpopular route in the game feel like something special. Salty Salty Speedway is a really cool concept that's not reflected in its connecting routes at all. The Venice-style port city is full of canals and fancy architecture, but almost everything around it is the same generic coastal biome that you'll see around Peach Beach, Koopa Troopa Beach, and even Wario Shipyard Beach. This makes for some great track-to-track synergy, but it doesn't do much to foreshadow the track itself. And the city, nestled between cliffs, isn't very easy to see from a distance, making the approach feel a little bit weak. The most mechanically faithful routes come from the west, where the water-themed Cheep Falls and Faraway Oasis use a downriver driving section as a transition into another water-themed track. Aesthetically, this approach is also incredible, featuring this gliding view of the city. The northern tracks use a back entrance that covers the same basic ground, or water, as the gliding section, but now you're in boat mode instead of bird mode. The only other route worth noting here comes from Wario Shipyard. It has a beautiful approach, and also dolphins. Cool idea, Wario. Heading back into the desert, we have Shy Guy's Bizarre Adventure. This is the better of two sandy desert tracks, and the route surrounding it feels so much more desert hills than the two contours that the actual desert hills got. Remember, Shy Guy Bazaar is responsible for the only good route Desert Hills even gets. Speaking of that route, the flying sandworms are still a highlight, but the following section is a little bit lackluster. A couple of turns, a couple of jumps, some scattered architecture, and two elephants. Still not as bad as the two contours, but also not super memorable. Mario Bros. Circuit also uses this approach, though it trades the sandworm section for a handful of camels. Choco Mountain has a unique gliding section going on, and eventually shows off the Shy Guy outskirts. It might look like a drab collection of sand-colored buildings, but it adds more flavor than you might expect. We've got one other entrance to Shy Guy Bazaar, and the routes that use it are certified bangers. If you've played Knockout Tour, you'll recognize the route from Airship Fortress, featuring this giant sand pit, which is itself a Mario Kart staple. But more importantly, the final lap is unique, taking us through a completely new Shy Guy Bazaar. At this point, you should be used to a destination track completely changing up based on the route, but this one feels special. The back half of Section 2 is used to preview the final lap, extending our time in the bazaar by a significant margin. And when we finally get to the final lap, we get an exclusive tour through Daisy's Palace, which we're just gonna pretend wasn't clearly appropriated from the Shy Guys. I love seeing an element from the background being brought into the foreground, becoming an attraction in its own right. This is a complete rewrite of one of the strongest tracks in the game, shaking everything up while somehow still keeping everything that made the original track special. It's a masterclass in the potential that routes have to completely rewrite everything we thought we knew. It's so much more interesting than just doing the same course again but backwards. Now, Wario Stadium also uses this entrance, but it ranks a little bit lower for not fully capitalizing on that sand pit. When you're leaving from Shy Guy Bazaar, the route to Airship Fortress once again gets special treatment. Yes, there's some awkward swerving, but in this case, it's offset by the chance to race through the bazaar one last time before we hit the road. Incidentally, the route back to Airship Fortress is also a Knockout Tour route. You can just tell the devs were proud of this one. Or maybe they made this one first and got burnt out immediately afterwards. There are two other exits that start in almost the same spot. The Choco Mountain route starts a little bit further back than the Desert Hills and Mario Bros route, and for what purpose? Starting so far back adds that awkward swerving that I hate. But on the other hand, it also makes it possible to access these ramps that you can trick up. But if that was so important, then why do the other two routes start so far ahead? My best guess is they wanted to give more space to this sharp left at the beginning of the route, which would otherwise show up pretty much immediately after the countdown. But it's not like this is the first time they asked the players for a sharp turn at the beginning of a lap. It's just a really confusing design choice, but whatever. Sky High Sundae is a lot like DK Spaceport in its unbalanced approach to polyamory. While 4 routes lead to Sky High Sundae, 6 routes leave Sky High Sundae, leaving 2 relationships feeling completely one-sided, maybe even a little parasocial. Every route involving Sky High Sundae focuses much more on the icy mountains than it does on the sweets, which barely bleed into the surrounding environment. In fact, I think this is one of the most abrupt biome shifts in the entire game. The ice cream theme is fantastic and colorful, which is a sharp contrast to the somewhat grounded snow and ice that precedes it. There's an understated candy motif that attempts to bridge the biomes, but it's not nearly pronounced enough to justify such a sudden change. Also, Sky High Sundae doesn't feel particularly sky-high. It's sitting right next to a much taller mountain. Though I suppose half a mountain-tall sundae doesn't quite roll off the tongue nearly as well. There's not a lot to see driving back out this front entrance. It's like the biome doesn't even care to leave an impression. To give you some perspective, we're spending less time here than we did exiting Desert Hills. It's such a nothing burger of a biome, even if the idea is really solid. The other exit, which is pointing down the mountain, is much more interesting. The screen bursting at the seams with these giant colorful popsicles, which are actual ice-based treats that do a much better job bridging this gap than the false gods of ice cream and candy. We're still dealing with the awkward food to ice road transition, but it's easier to forget that when you're busy tricking down a mountain. Funny enough, these jumps are designed to work both ways, but no route will ever ask you to climb up them. Why? Is it because this entrance skips the first third of the course? I think that's a bad excuse. Plenty of routes have unconventional entrances. Honestly, this particular instance just feels lazy, like they couldn't be bothered to build the course in such a way that this entrance could make sense. It's moments like these that make the game feel a little underpolished. Not rushed exactly, but like they spent all their creative ideas on the front end of development and then cobbled together the bare minimum to make up the rest. Starview Peak lives and dies by its aesthetic. The interior library is beautiful, but lasts all of 10 seconds. The Starview aspect of this course is relegated to constellations on the ceiling of a track that takes place mostly outside. It doesn't even have the best sparkling water section. Rainbow Road has it completely beat. But the aesthetic is good, and the routes leading up to it have nice unifying elements that complement it while still feeling distinct from the main track. Mostly, this comes down to icy roads with spear-shaped architecture. Boo Cinema, Dandelion Depths, and the straggling Mario Circuit have by far the best approach, with the massive observatory looming overhead throughout most of the route. The road itself is an icy blue that fits the course's aesthetic perfectly. Meanwhile, the road from Sky High Sundae is also icy, but instead of a nice view of the destination, it has this glowing cavern with colors reminiscent of the observatory. The Wario Shipyard route has a similar cave actually, though it meets up with DK Pass and Cheep Falls to launch up from the snowboarding side of the mountain and directly into the observatory's front entrance. This angle definitely has the most momentum, but the natural shape of the mountain means you never have a great line of sight for the course you're approaching. And as cool as those icy stairs up the mountain are, you fly over them in a matter of seconds. They're much more fun on the way down, where they provide immediate tricking opportunities. Though this is a consistent pattern with most of these courses. Driving downhill is just better than driving uphill. Who knew? Mario Circuit and friends might have a nice view of their destination going uphill, but generally, the view is consistently nicer on the way down. The route to DK Pass and Cheep Falls opens up the entire snowboarding slope, and the route to Wario Shipyard is a completely unique one-way trek down a narrow mountain ridge. This path down is a little reminiscent of what Boo Cinema and Dandelion Depths have, except it's just a little bit harder, and it ends with a smooth glide out to the coastline. Finally, driving back down to Sky High Sundae means you might actually use these half-pipes. Toad's Factory has an identity problem, or maybe it has an identity solution. Most tracks stick squarely within their favorite biome, whether it be the coast, the mountains, or Oklahoma. But Toad's Factory positions itself between biomes, acting as its own little junction. Exit in one direction and you'll find yourself in the happy-go-lucky countryside, heading towards a bright future. Exit in the other direction and experience a world of misery and death, a thick coat of ash resting on a wasteland of decay. They manage this dichotomy quite nicely by situating Toad's Factory in the middle of a river, effectively inside the border in a way that ensures you'll only ever see one biome at a time. And it works because rivers belong pretty much anywhere you put them. It's sort of a cheat code to making any biome transition feel more natural. Toad's Factory has 3 access points, each one memorable in its own way. The Acorn Heights, Bones Burnout, Airship Fortress, Bowser's Castle, and Wario Stadium routes all convene at this ramp, leading from the water to a side entrance that shaves off the first few seconds of the track. It's cool to drop right onto the factory floor, but it makes the already short final lap of Toad's Factory feel even shorter than it needs to be. Fortunately, the other entrances have similarly exciting moments and make the final lap feel longer. The drawbridge entrance is used by 4 routes, and if you're approaching from Choco Mountain or Moo Meadows, the drawbridge will always be up. It's a fun way to launch into the familiar muddy tractor section of Toad's Factory and kick off the final lap in style. I don't know why the routes from Peach Stadium and Mario Bros. Circuit refuse to lift up the drawbridge for us. I honestly think they're just being mean. The final entrance is shared by Mario Circuit and Dandelion Depths, who approach from this tunnel and climb this floating ramp structure to the top of the factory, giving us an even better jump than the drawbridge. This lengthens the time we spend at Toad's factory, which I personally love, even if the unions hate me for it. The roof entrance is obviously a one-way thing, so these two routes exit with the drawbridge routes. Unfortunately, the drawbridge is always down when you start at Toad's factory, which is a little disappointing. Yeah, it's nice to revisit the mud section on our way out, but can a fella not get a nice little jump for the road? Exiting down the ramp into the water feels a lot less exciting. Not only is it barely representative of Toad's factory, but the water sections themselves are lackluster. Either you're taking a steep river uphill, or the water section lasts all of 5 seconds, and suddenly you're in the Ashlands. It's an underwhelming section no matter how you slice it. Now, I do like the route to Wario Stadium, as this concrete ditch feels like a natural in-between from our industrial factory setting and the upcoming scrap iron jungle. But that's the only route that really feels like a spiritual successor to the factory it's supposed to represent. This brings us back around to that identity problem I was talking about earlier. Toad's factory doesn't clash with the Ashlands or the generic plains, but it doesn't do much to fit in either. Don't get me wrong, the landmarks do their jobs. You can see the cranes from a distance, foreshadowing an industrial destination, and the giant piles of crates signal that the factory is just around the corner. But while these visual cues are strong, they're also superficial. You could replace all of them with Disney imagery and then swap out Toad's factory for Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and it would fit the environment just as well. But maybe that's a good thing. Team Cherry has expertly implemented this course in such a way that maintains recognizability while also providing the neighboring biomes some room to breathe. Sure, the imagery could be stronger, like some of these water exits don't read as Toad Factory at all, but I can respect any track that makes an effort to be a part of the world around it, even if I think they could have done more. And while we're still talking about it, sort of, the route from Toad's factory is my favorite way to enter Wario Stadium. Not only do we drive through the dilapidated graffiti ditches, the perfect industrial love child between these two tracks, but we also get the best view of the stadium as we glide overhead, eventually touching down right in the middle of the track and getting to experience an extra half lap of the main course. The route from Airship Fortress shares this entrance, though I think that route feels more like an Airship Fortress type route, rather than a shared venture between two courses that really love each other. Like Toad's factory, Wario Stadium has planted itself on the border of two biomes. The main biome, where the front entrance is located, is the northern edge of the Arizona region. The desert routes have the most direct approach, crossing this iron bridge and entering through the front door, which is good, but the route from Choco Mountain really understands the aesthetic, focusing more on rusty truss bridges and cranes that make the whole route feel scrappy. Bowser's Castle and Dry Bones Burnout share an approach from the stadium's rear. While the color of the Ashlands doesn't match the reddish-brown soil of Wario Stadium nearly as well as Arizona did, this route does understand how important it is to pack the sidelines full of scrap metal. This approach also gives us a reversed final lap, which is rare enough to be a novelty, even though I don't think this one is particularly good. As cool as Wario Stadium is as a destination track, it kinda sucks as a starting track. Every countdown has something wrong with it. The most forgivable are the north-facing countdowns that have us climbing these bumpy hills. It doesn't feel great, but it's also not uniquely bad, especially compared to the giant metal pipes in the ground you have to stumble across when you're heading back out towards the front. What are these doing here? But my least favorite, and perhaps the worst starting point in the entire game, has us jumping over this giant explosive ramp during the countdown. I know it looks cool. I know that massive jumps have always been a staple of these muddy stadium tracks, but it's downright offensive to watch my character dragged, entirely without agency, entirely without momentum, across an otherwise really cool jump. If that jump were so important, why not start the race like 5 seconds before we hit the ramp, so we could actually start the level off in style? Look at him, he doesn't even make it all the way. It's a cool idea, and it represents the track well enough, but it's just not fun. Anyway, I'm sure you didn't notice, but I did skip over Wario Shipyard, and that's because alphabetically, it's impossible to say which Wario track should come first. But I love Wario Shipyard, and I love the routes that take us there. 3 of the 6 converge at this arch, a gateway leading from the coastal biome into one of the most iconic sections in the game. This route encapsulates everything that makes Wario Shipyard iconic, from the choppy waves to the jagged rocks to the broken hulls of boats rising from the sand. This path is even better the other way, where you can trick off ship masts and glide over the whirlpool. The path to Salty Salty Speedway has the same general aesthetic, but to a slightly lesser degree, and it has a lot of focus on this brighter dolphin section that feels a lot less ominous. Which isn't a problem, I think the dolphins are awesome. The coldest path comes from Sky High Sunday, its choppy waves being the result of a typhoon's gust. There's a surprising emphasis on these broken down fortress ruins, which probably have some kind of lore implication that I really just can't be bothered to investigate. Mario Kart theorists, now's your time. But the route from Peach Beach feels uniquely fresh, taking us past tropical islands and red dragons and eventually delivering us into this cool side entrance that just feels like a natural extension of Wario Shipyard. The reverse routes are pretty much the same thing again but backwards, but it's really nice to have a track where every single route feels like a banger. So that's 29 tracks. The next one might be the last one alphabetically, but it's definitely the first in our hearts. Whistle Stop Summit, my beloved. This is one of the best standalone tracks in the entire game, and it happens to be the destination for one of the best routes in the game. But let's talk about the lesser ones first. If we're approaching from Mario Bros Circuit or Desert Hills, we find ourselves revisiting Armadillo Junction, but this time our focus might be on that railroad bridge up ahead, which is an obvious connection to the upcoming Whistle Stop Summit. If we approach from Choco Mountain, we follow this familiar, lonely highway featuring this abandoned barn that doesn't even have coins in it. And if we approach from DK Spaceport, we follow a winding cliffside road that has a fantastic view of this Arizona River. Other routes have used this river too, and at this point in the video, you might be feeling like we've seen all this world has to offer. But then we get Crown City to Whistle Stop Summit. When I first talked about connecting routes on this channel, I gassed this route up, thinking it was the perfect example of what routes could be. I didn't realize at the time, but it was the only example of what routes could be. This one train yard section gives me more of what I want than any other route in the game, and it's a little embarrassing. Like, of course the train-themed Whistle Stop Summit would be preceded by a route completely focused on grinding on rails and jumping off of trains. This route feels like actual, thoughtful game design, introducing an element in Section 2 that is later capitalized on in Section 3. If every route was this committed to extending their destination tracks in interesting new ways, this game might actually be worth $80. But you've heard me explain every other route in the game. You know that nothing fully lives up to this idea. Not even the reverse of this route, which takes a completely different path. And that's part of why I needed to start this video with an overview of every destination track. These routes do not exist in a vacuum, and the way they represent their connecting courses is so important to their identity. Each route should be interesting enough on its own, but it also needs to feel like a seamless transition from one biome to the next. These were some of the developers' stated goals, so these will be key factors in my final ranking. And let's briefly touch on those other factors. How much I hate the rolling start. How many opportunities there are for extra speed, such as boost panels, dash food, and other items that fall into the track. The complexity and frequency of the turns and drifting. How well each route represents the elements of its starting or destination courses. Pleasant scenery, notable landmarks, and moments of spectacle. Smooth transitions between biomes, with extra points for transitions that feel particularly clever. Enemy biodiversity, how well the enemies fit their environments and whether they even affect the race. Opportunities to grind, glide, wall ride, or otherwise do tricks. I also give points for the final approach to a track. Do we enter through an unexpected or exciting angle? Do we get to enjoy the anticipation of the destination looming overhead? Is there a glorious moment where the track comes into view? Or do we just sorta arrive unceremoniously? I do take into account the final lap, though I have downplayed its importance here compared to a lot of other rankings. And finally, I gave extra points whenever there was a truly unique moment, something you couldn't find on any other route. Anyway, with all of that pretense out of the way, it is finally time for our route ranking. 202, Dandelion Depths to DK Pass. I hate how so many Dandelion Depths routes choose to emphasize the Parabitty construction theme over the Dandelion Depths theme, but this is the most egregious example. And I know this is gonna make the rusty pipe fans in the audience upset, but are we really gonna stoop so low as to count this as Dandelion Depths representation? It's just a pipe. Red metal on the outside, water underneath. It's not that crazy. Wait. Now, hold on. Are these red pipes supposed to be abstract representations of what Dandelion Depths is supposed to be about? If so, that is brilliant. Deeply profound. Plus 10 points. We'll see this route again later. 202. Crown City to Choco Mountain. I don't hate starting at Crown City. The seaside view is kinda nice, and I like the vibes of this tunnel, but it's not enough. The driving here is not super interesting, and the chocolate swamp is equally uninteresting. Cap it off with a lap around Choco Mountain that I think is just okay, and, well, that's a low rubric score. 201. Choco Mountain to Peach Stadium. I don't like the chocolate swamp, and nobody likes the boring Peach Stadium lap. The only reason this route isn't lower is because of these lumps of mud right here. Not only do they perfectly reflect the muddy swamp behind us, but they also foreshadow the steaming pile of horseshit that is Peach Stadium. 200. Great Question Block Ruins to Salty Speedway. I know the devs think the gliding start looks cool, but you already know that I don't like it. But even if I did, I wouldn't like how boring the rest of this route is. The jungle ruins can be cool, but they're so underdeveloped here, and the coastal biome drive to Salty Speedway isn't interesting either. And Salty Speedway just isn't a good enough destination to make up the difference. 199. Faraway Oasis to Peach Beach. Swerving around this foreclosed Yoshis is a really sad way to start a route. It brings up a lot of uncomfortable questions. Why did this particular Yoshi's fail? Was it too similar to the other Yoshis? Could it not find a way to stand out from the others? Well, this route is the same. There are so many savanna routes that blend into each other aesthetically, and then we get to the coastal biome and it's the same exact problem. It doesn't do anything to stand out. We end with this sandbar that's just so straight and boring. Like, there's cataquacks, but like, it's a little too late in my opinion. 198. Salty Speedway to Faraway Oasis. This coastal section is fine, I suppose, but it doesn't lead to anything interesting, and the savanna biome isn't any better. In another timeline, courses that start at Salty Speedway might have ranked higher than courses starting at Peach Beach just because we don't have to deal with that annoying sandbar. Unfortunately, starting here also means that we are in the middle of a wide turn on the water, which just doesn't feel good. 197. Peach Beach to Salty Speedway. This is the most picturesque beach in the game. Umbrellas, ocean, a nice burger joint. This is where I take people out on dates. I rank it low for gatekeeping reasons. 196. Peach Stadium to Choco Mountain. For how bad Peach Stadium is, it should be no surprise that driving the other way should be a considerable upgrade. 195. Sky High Sundae to DK Pass. Even though I like the ice cream theme, something about this starting area always rubs me the wrong way. The Sky High Sundae area isn't very interesting, and there just isn't that much to do from a driving perspective. But this route does have a couple of things going for it. I like the icy cave and then a short snowboarding section that takes us to DK Pass in a very natural feeling way. Honestly, the aesthetics of the DK Pass area are the only interesting thing about this track. 194. Great Question Block Ruins to Peach Beach. This route has all the same problems as Great Question Block Ruins to Salty Speedway, but there are a few features that make Peach Beach feel like a better destination. Yes, I do like the cataquacks in a vacuum, and I do like these bubbles that drop items onto the track, but the main thing here is that Peach Beach just looks so good as you approach, and as a final lap, Peach Beach just feels a little bit more satisfying to play on. 193. Mario Bros. Circuit to Desert Hills. As much as I'm always hyping up the Arizona biome and its natural connection to the neighboring sandy desert biome, it's not enough to save the underwhelming final lap that is reversed Desert Hills. Nothing in this route is unique, and this is the least exciting way to experience any of it. 192. Cheep Falls to Dandelion Depths. With the road winding up the autumn hillside, the foliage shifts from the vibrant oranges of Cheep Falls into the soft yellows and reds of Parabitty construction. This is one of the best, smoothest transitions in the entire game, and it's undercut by the fact that it starts with the worst jostling section in the entire game. Why did Lakitu approve this? And even though I enjoy the switch back up the hill visually, I don't think it's a great representation of what Cheep Falls was all about. And the second half is no better, barely representing parabity construction, which, as I've said before, is the least interesting part of Dandelion Depths. Basically, this transition between biomes is so smooth, but it's also like the only good part of this route. 191, Choco Mountain to Moo Meadows. I still don't like the chocolate swamp, but I do like jumping out of the swamp and seeing a train pass overhead and the cliffs staying that consistent shade of brown on either side. There's something about these billboards that helps this area stick out a little bit. Moo Meadows ranks a little bit lower than a lot of other tracks, and it's not just because it's been on every single home console since 2008, it's just kind of a bad destination track. Partially because the final lap isn't super exciting, and partially because it's not very easy to appreciate Moo Meadows from a distance. Compared to all the other destinations that actually look like something, Moo Meadows is just kinda nothing. 190, Salty Speedway to DK Pass. In some ways, this feels like the most abrupt transition in the game. How are we going to go from the bright, sunny coastline up into the snowiest part of the map? There's no attempt to reconcile these biomes, there's just snow all of a sudden. And the rest of the route just isn't good enough to cover for these problems. 189, Moo Meadows to Choco Mountain. We start by getting dragged through these awkward, lumpy hills that I complained about extensively earlier. But from there, the route is just kind of generic. So I'm gonna go out of my way to find some nice things to say about it. There's cows from the farm. I like this moment at the beginning of Section 2, where the mountains look like they're closing in on you. And then this jump into the swamp area does make it feel like a naturally enclosed location, rather than a sudden shift between completely unrelated biomes. Oh look, there's a giant lump of dirt here too. Maybe that Peach Stadium route earlier wasn't being all that unique or clever after all. 188, Peach Beach to Faraway Oasis. This route is still boring the other way, not doing much to differentiate itself from the other coastal and savannah routes. The reason this route ranks higher than its rival is the ending. With this one jump onto the waterfall, we're nailing spectacle, giving an extra trick opportunity, and extending the amount of driving that we get to do. It's not enough to carry the entire route, but it is enough to give it a couple extra points over its rival. 187, Dandelion Depths to DK Pass. Those 10 bonus points really didn't do very much, did they? Dandelion Depths to DK Pass is just not a very interesting route. And no amount of hydraulic pipes will be enough to lift this one out of obscurity. Like, this route doesn't do anything particularly wrong, it just doesn't really do anything. And honestly, that's worse. 186, Salty Speedway to Peach Beach. As Salty Speedway had you decide between land and sea, so too does this route. There are some cool little jumps, a nice little burger joint by the beach, which we are not talking about because, as you recall, we are gatekeeping this location. 185, Dino Jungle to Faraway Oasis. As much as I love Dino Jungle, I hate starting there and dealing with this lumpy mess of a countdown. The jungle doesn't look nearly as dense when we're driving in this direction, and if we're heading to Faraway Oasis, we don't even get the pleasure of driving on that awesome waterfall that you already know what I'm talking about, it's too iconic. Now, I do like the transition here, like the dinosaurs have broken free of their enclosures, but the grass randomly shifts colors in a completely different spot for no reason. There is a really cool, very optional trick opportunity with this dinosaur, but otherwise this route doesn't have the landmarks or the interesting driving to rank it any higher. 184, DK Pass to Sky High Sundae. Sky High Sundae is an easy top 10 destination track, so it just naturally is going to rank a lot higher than the reverse Sky High Sundae to DK Pass. And also, the ice cream motif is way more pronounced when we're approaching than when we're leaving. 183, Bones Burnout to Mario Circuit. This route looks really cool at the beginning, but the Ashen Wasteland just gets less and less interesting the further we get from that Dry Bones Day of the Dead theme. And then we hit the area next to Mario Circuit, which is just really boring and generic, unless you're 3 years old and love colorful blocks. It's not all bad, I've said it before, but lap 2 of Mario Circuit is the best standalone lap. But it's still just kinda boring. 182, Faraway Oasis to Peach Stadium. This route is for the giraffe lovers. I don't think they add as much as like zebras running alongside you, but a little biodiversity never hurt anyone. I also like these ostriches crossing the road, even if they're a bit easy to avoid. I'll even allow a bit of extra credit for having a bridge over water, which I'm going to pretend is an intentional reference to the bridge-like architecture of Away Oasis. Unfortunately, no amount of competence can fully compensate for having to end at Peach Stadium. 181. Acorn Heights to Boo Cinema. This dead log perfectly encapsulates the transition from the vibrant greenery and giant trees of the Acorn biome and into the spooky mists of the haunted woods. Unfortunately, the rest of this route is pretty boring. The twists and turns of the boardwalk are fun to drive on, but there's a looming feeling of why are we meandering around so much? The course is right there. 180. Dandelion Depths to Starview Peak. Dandelion Depths is represented here by a whole bunch of red parabity construction towers, which is visually way more interesting than those red pipes from earlier, but maybe not quite as poetic. This sudden shift into a snow biome is almost kind of covered up by these small rocks, but then we're also suddenly transitioning into an icy blue road, so we're not scoring very high in elegant biome shifts. This path up the mountain looks way more interesting than it actually is. The Typhoos look like they might just blow you right off the edge, but you kind of have to go out of your way to even experience their windbox. But the main highlight of the drive is having the best view of Starview Peak looming overhead. Sadly, Starview Peak also suffers from looking really cool and also not being very interesting to drive on. 179. Choco Mountain to Crown City. Crown City is just a better destination track in general, and this water lap is incredibly rare, all things considered. 178. Acorn Heights to Dry Bones Burnout. Surely you remember my rant about the sudden and inexplicable biome shift, right? Well, here it is again. I hate this. There is nothing less congruous than the vibrant greenery of Acorn Heights and the dead as a doornail wasteland that leads to Dry Bones Burnout. And as much as I love playing on Dry Bones Burnout, it feels like a detour here. Like the first course we see looming in the distance is Bowser's Castle, and then we take a sudden right and we're somewhere else. It does not feel like thoughtful world design. 177. Away Oasis to Dino Jungle. Thematically, it's really cool that we're going from the savannah, which is full of wild animals, to the jungle, which is full of even bigger wild animals. Dino Jungle is also a much better destination than it was a starting point, so of course it's going to rank higher than its reverse. 176. Cheep Falls to Moo Meadows. With the road winding up the autumn countryside, the foliage shifts from the vibrant oranges of the Cheep Falls biome into the soft yellows and reds of the Parabity construction biome. It's too bad we're not going to the Parabity construction biome. Instead, we're taking this scenic drive back down the other side of the hill. And while it does look nice, there's this weird hard transition, not just between different kinds of grass, but also between different kinds of dirt. Like you couldn't come up with a dirt gradient that felt more natural. But this route does have a good view of Moo Meadows, and it captures the farmland vibe pretty nicely, which ranks it higher than Cheep Falls to Dandelion Depths. 175. DK Spaceport to Crown City. The underwhelming Pinewood Forest doesn't really reflect DK Spaceport at all, and the drive to Crown City is mostly unremarkable. This route does have a good view of the Crown City skyline, and while it does have a unique entrance into the city, it ultimately defaults into the back alley lap of Crown City, which isn't bad, but also feels like missed potential. If we were to climb up the city rooftops, it could have felt like a natural follow-up to DK Spaceport, like Donkey Kong is not a stranger to climbing buildings. Or, even if not, taking that secret water lap would visually reflect the water that's been present for the entire route. So yeah, this back alley is pretty much the worst decision they could have made. 174. Toad's Factory to Moo Meadows. We exit through the mud and spend most of the route in the generic green 1-1 biome, but with these slanted walls that are at least a little bit memorable. We can see the farm's windmills from quite a ways away, and the route feels pretty direct without feeling too straight. Also, did you know this vine plant was here? This is such a cool mechanic, but you have to go into the off-road to take advantage of it, and it's hard to notice if you don't know what you're looking for, and it's honestly not that helpful, so what are we doing here? I'm not gonna mention these plants every single time they show up on a route because they're kind of out of the way, but like, couldn't the developers have made these things a little bit easier to use? 173. Desert Hills to Mario Bros. Circuit. This route, just like its reverse, is something of a nothing. It's not the only route to use this desert path, it's not the only route to pass through Armadillo Junction, and it's not the only route to end with a reversed Mario Bros. Circuit. Don't get me wrong, it's awesome to trick onto these canyon walls, and I think these blip bugs are a fun way to spice up any route, but it's hard to rank a route very high when it doesn't have anything halfway original up its sleeve. 172, Boo Cinema to Dandelion Depths. The Boo Boardwalk can have a bunch of interesting twists and turns to make up for its drab atmosphere, but this one barely deviates from a straight line. Things get better in the picturesque haunted woods, but this biome doesn't last forever. We exit into a tunnel that takes us into the Dandelion Depths biome, which is still more interesting than just default green, but it's also not terribly exciting. The boost panels on the ground are doing most of the work in making this route feel semi-interesting. Though I will confess, I do love boost panels on a traffic route. They're just so nostalgic. 171, Crown City to Desert Hills. 4-segment courses can be a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes the route is so long it makes sense to divide it into smaller parts. Other times it feels like we're just stapling other established routes together because we can. That's basically what's happening here. 3 routes stapled together. Crown City to Mario Bros. Circuit, Choco Mountain to Whistle Stop Summit, and Whistle Stop Summit to Desert Hills. It's a unique combination, I suppose, but this sort of route comes across as an afterthought. It's nice if you're in the mood for a longer race, but at some point you have to wonder if it's worth all that hassle to end up at Desert Hills. 170, Cheep Falls to DK Pass. I love the look of the autumn biome, but this has got to be one of its weakest showings. After we've left the course, there's not a lot to look at as we quickly move on to the winter biome. You might see this overhead bridge as a sort of gate between biomes, except the snow bleeds over and makes the whole thing feel very abrupt. Thematically, at least, going from autumn to winter does make sense, and I do like how this area has a nice, unobstructed view of the snowy mountains in the distance. If nothing else, at least it's a pleasant drive. 169, Shy Guy Bazaar to Mario Circuit. The first section here is really short, and the only memorable thing about it is the existence of these elephant-riding Shy Guys, or maybe this large wall? I'll grant that I do like the jumps in the road, but there's not a lot going on here. The second segment is a little bit more interesting, or maybe I just like these camels. Look at them! They're stopping traffic! I find the shift into Arizona to be quite believable, and while I know there's a more iconic 4-lane Arizona highway out there, this one's just curvier. You guys like that, right? Curvy roads? 168, DK Pass to Salty Speedway. This one ranks a lot higher than its counterpart because the drive down the mountain just gives us a much more pleasant view than the drive up. 167, Faraway Oasis to Koopa Troopa Beach. This is one of the more distinct Savannah segments, with zebras racing beside you and elephants that actually matter. We glide across a river, trick across the docks, and then fly the final stretch to our destination. There's so much going on that we can almost forgive it for being a Koopa Troopa Beach route. 166, Starview Peak to Dandelion Depths. The view of this mountain is so much better on the way down. And while we are here, I'd like to draw some attention to the awesome visual connection between these two routes, which both feature these mystical blue water sections. The route itself isn't anything groundbreaking, but it is nice to have a pair of tracks that actually feel like they go together. 165, Cheep Falls to Faraway Oasis. I really like this riverside drive, and the transition between these biomes is so buttery smooth. Even if the driving isn't super complicated, I do like that the water motif is a consistent through line running through these courses. 164, DK Pass to Dandelion Depths. This one power line jump is cooler than anything else the reverse version of this route has to offer. Except, of course, that abstract red pipe that these two routes share. I definitely overvalued that little detail, but at this point I'm too far in the ranking to go back and change it. 163, Beach Stadium to Koopa Troopa Beach. A lot of people rank this one really low for being a straight line to one of the worst courses in the game, but I feel like we're kind of underselling it. Like, it's memorable, isn't it? How many routes have us gliding under the drawn Crown Bridge? 3? That's barely any. One good set piece does so much for setting this track above some of the other more generic ones on this list. And yes, this route was marginally improved by the routes update, but the only difference here is a split path in Section 2 that adds a couple of turns, which is honestly a little underwhelming compared to what some of the other routes got. 162. Dino Jungle to Salty Speedway. Between the diminishing Dino Jungle and the bright, generic coastline, we have the true star of the show, Giant Waterfall, that doesn't have an official name. This is one of the most memorable spots in the game, and is always a welcome treat. But as cool as it is, I still haven't forgiven them for dragging us across that bumpy starting line. This thing is so bad that it cancels out all the bonus points that the waterfall would have earned. Also, it's worth noting that Giant Waterfall is exclusive to the Dino Jungle routes, which is awkward because it's clearly supposed to be part of the Savannah biome. But that Savannah section feels like it lasts all of 10 seconds before moving on to the next thing, coming across as a completely unnecessary biome change designed to bother me specifically. 161. Whistle Stop Summit to Desert Hills. Yet another bad rolling start from Whistle Stop. I guess it's fitting that the train course would make us feel like we're stuck on rails. And there are some legitimate rail grinding bits as we head down the mountain, but it feels weird to count it as a Whistle Stop homage when they're just power lines. We pass through Armadillo Junction, Arizona's third best landmark, and jump into the sandy desert biome. The transition is clean, but the final stretch is a pretty boring desert section for people who are fans of not having a fun time. And of course, Desert Hills just isn't a top contender for a destination track. 160. Peach Stadium to Faraway Oasis. The pink trees of this route are rather pleasant, but swinging from these nice, well-manicured green lawns into the untamed savanna feels a little bit sudden. Yes, I understand that the untamed savanna is probably better for the pollinators, but there's nothing interesting to see here. 159. Dandelion Depths to Moo Meadows. This rocky bridge section continues to be a pleasant nod to geology, and it continues to be a little disappointing that we have to leave the somewhat notable Parabitty construction biome for the much more generic Shinshu field. We have a surprising amount of charge and chucks around these parts, but the highlight is definitely taking that back entrance through Moo Meadows. 158. Salty Speedway to Great Question Block Ruins. The transition from the bright coastline to the lush jungle is much more natural than I would have initially given it credit for. Unfortunately, this route features the most boring jungle section imaginable. There's like one piranha plant, and then a straight line of broken pillars. I like tricking off these giant blocks in the water, but you can do that anytime you approach that great mysterious block in the sky, so this route's not doing anything special. 157. Wario Stadium to Mario Bros. Circuit. Oh look, it's that bumpy start over metal pipes that I hate. Fun fact, the point totals for these middle-of-the-pack tracks are so close that this one 4-point deduction creates a placing difference of 20 ranks. So while this track does plenty of things well enough, it's heavily limiting itself by not having a normal starting line. And they could have easily started the race like a few seconds later if they wanted to avoid this. They just didn't care. In fact, you probably don't care. But to me, it feels unintentional and sloppy. Anyway, I do like the bridge, the tunnel, and this narrow chasm, but otherwise, this is just another standard route through Arizona. 156. Dry Bones Burnout to Acorn Heights. This is one of the more drab parts of the Ashen Wasteland, and of course, the transition into the lush forest is still really jarring. But even then, this forest section doesn't even look very interesting. The most interesting element here is the piranha creepers, which drop an item if you hit them, but always in such a way that makes it very hard to take advantage of the item they dropped. Or, if you happen to have a feather, you can always make it jump for it, but that's kinda situational. That being said, it does have a stronger sense of direction than its reverse counterpart. Like, we can see our destination, and we are very clearly building up to it. 155. Peach Beach to Great Question Block Ruins. I've said it before, but starting at Peach Beach is less annoying than starting at Salty Speedway, which is why it ranks a little bit higher when they cross streams. Even if the driving in this first section isn't super exciting in a vacuum, at the very least, it's all very Peach Beach. That's not something Salty Speedway can claim about its own routes. Unfortunately, the jungle stretch is still kind of boring here. 154. Mario Bros. Circuit to Choco Mountain. The conch doors and speed bumps might help you forget that you're driving in a straight line for a little bit longer than is comfortable. And while I don't find the chocolate swamp biome very interesting, I do have to give props for how natural this transition feels. 153, Wario Stadium to Choco Mountain. Oh boy, we're back to that starting lineup across the metal bumps in the ground that are there for literally no reason other than to bother me. That being said, I'm really glad they linked these two courses together. In a rare moment of thematic solidarity, we have one monster truck arena after another. And not only do the Arizona and swamp biomes mesh together super well, but we also have these cranes around this broken truss bridge, reflecting the slapdash construction that seems to define these courses. It would have ranked a lot higher if we didn't have that awful starting lineup, or if Choco Mountain was an actual good track, but that's neither here nor there. 152, Boo Cinema to Mario Circuit. We're following the same exit through the woods as the route to Dandelion Depths, but instead of going into that tunnel, we are taking a hard right onto the interstate. I like that this glide truck is always here to give us a nice view of this otherwise really straightforward traffic-heavy route. There's a really cool rail off to the side that gives us a chance to trick off of some note blocks, which is really unique. Only a couple other routes do this sort of thing. The real problem with this route is that the final lap is really, really boring. Like Koopa Troopa Beach levels of boring. Arguably even worse than Peach Stadium levels of boring. And it's a little frustrating because we know that if we had started the race at Acorn Heights, yeah, we would play through Mario Circuit 1, followed by Mario Circuit 2 and Mario Circuit 3. These courses have the exact same entrance, and yet only one of them plays through the entirety of Mario Circuit. It's like they were insistent that at least one route end with a single lap of Mario Circuit 1, and Boo Cinema just happened to draw the short stick. 151, Whistle Stop Summit to Mario Bros. Circuit. This is like the premier example of an Armadillo Junction route. The train tracks overhead are a great environmental connection to Whistle Stop, and this water tower is the exact same brand as the one we'll see at the circuit. And there's something about Mario Circuit that just fits here. It's like you turn a corner and see exactly what you were expecting. Too bad we're playing on the backwards lap instead of the forwards one. 150, Moo Meadows to Mario Circuit. This is one of 4 routes that use the first 20 seconds of Moo Meadows as a part of the route, and it's a fun bit every single time. I wish more tracks did this. It lets you feel like you're spending more time at the actual destination courses, which is what everyone seems to want out of this game. From here, it's more meadows, and eventually Mario Circuit 3. This route is as high as it is because it commits so hard to the cow aesthetic that I couldn't justify placing it lower. 149, Choco Mountain to Mario Bros. Circuit. This route has all the same pieces as its reverse Mario Bros. Circuit to Choco Mountain, but even a backwards lap of Mario Bros. Circuit is a much better destination track than Choco Mountain will ever be. Is a man allowed to hate a swamp? Is that too much to ask these days? 148, Toad's Factory to Mario Circuit. This is the best exit from Toad's Factory and the best standalone lap of Mario Circuit. But the main thing I want to talk about here are these springs on the side of the road that are, for some reason, completely unique to this route. They show up in free roam all the time, but as far as routes go, this is the only place they exist. This is also one of 2 sections to feature these bouncy note blocks. These mechanics are really interesting, but they're not quite as intuitive to pull off as one might think. And furthermore, despite being unique elements, they don't really feel unique. There are so many routes in this game that would benefit immensely from having a nice little spring with note blocks off to the side. I know people tend to see these routes as having a bunch of copy-pasted assets, but wouldn't it be nice if there was just more to do on every given route? It's more interesting than just spamming power lines anyway. Update, Koopa Troopa Beach to DK Spaceport now has springs too. I will not let this affect the uniqueness score of a route that, for all intents and purposes, came up with the idea first. 147, Sky High Sunday to Starview Peak. The best thing about Starview Peak is how cool it looks, especially from a distance. So, when you get a route up the mountain that can barely see Starview, it's starting at a bit of a disadvantage. They try to make up for it with this aesthetically pleasing ice cave, but it shares its visual identity with another cave further down the mountain, so it's not exactly unique. Then we have some interesting architecture in the final stretch, but it really doesn't alleviate the suddenness with which we finally arrive at the main course. There are penguins sliding down the mountain, which is actually a unique element, but they don't really fit the aesthetic of either course they're communicating. They're just generic penguins on a generic ice track. And, as is the case with many obstacles in this game, they're just too small and infrequent to be actual obstacles. Half-pipes make an ultra-rare appearance, which I love, but there's also not really a good reason to use them. No items, no coins, just nothing. Somehow, my favorite thing about this route is the mountain view, which keeps shifting from gazing up the snowy peaks to staring down the sheer cliffside. 146. Acorn Heights to Toad's Factory. Well, here we are again, moving from the forest biome to the ash biome. It just feels so lazy and abrupt, but we've talked about this at length already. Let's talk about the rest of this route. After the horrid transition, we find ourselves in the ashen biome that takes up the middle third of this route. I know there are some cool things in this biome, but it feels like this entire route is on the boring outskirts of something interesting. This route ranks higher than Acorn Heights to Dry Bones Burnout due to having a little bit more scenic variety towards the end. We drive through the excellent Fishbone Zone and then close out the route by rushing down this river to Toad's Factory. It also loses a couple of points for being a hodgepodge of other routes that refuses to add anything new. 145. Moo Meadows to Toad's Factory. This route suffers from that bumpy start that Moo Meadows sometimes has, but the main reason it ranks higher than its reverse counterpart is that it arrives at the much better of two Wii Mushroom Cup destination tracks. 144. Acorn Heights to Mario Circuit. I think this route has a lot going for it. Lily Pad Pond, wigglers and vines, giant apple that probably fell from a giant tree. It's a bit of a shame that this magical vibe is undercut by the fact that we're driving to the aggressively generic Mario Circuit. However, if your goal is to have fun on Mario Circuit, this is the only route to let you experience all 3 laps of the track. 143. Mario Bros. Circuit to Shy Guy Bazaar. You guys liked that curvy 4-lane highway, right? Well, we're back, and the camels are still here. These dudes are never making it to work, my god. But what makes the difference? The view heading downhill is just a little better than the view driving uphill. The approach to the main track is much more heads-on, and Shy Guy Bazaar as a destination is just much more interesting than Mario Bros. Circuit. 142. Dandelion Depths to Mario Circuit. The rock bridges here will become a pretty common sight if you ever, for whatever reason, decide to play every single route in the game. And as I said before, it's a fun example of the kind of erosion that created the Dandelion Depths in the first place. It doesn't have the poetry of water under red metal, but also, this area is just a pleasant drive. It's more memorable than Section 2 anyway, which is just another generic drive through Sunbeam Plains. And then Mario Circuit 3. Thrilling. 141. Sky High Sundae to Dandelion Depths. The most interesting part of this route is probably the shimmering ice cave, followed by a path on the upper mountain slopes. This is the same slope that leads down to DK Pass, but we're not really heading in that direction. Instead, we stick to this upper section of the slope, which doesn't really read as DK Pass so much as a generic extension of the snow biome. That being said, I really respect how this 4-segment course never feels like it's retreading familiar territory. The angle we take across this mountain, and the subsequent snowy highway, are unique enough to justify this route's existence, even if nothing stands out as particularly memorable. 140. DK Pass to Moo Meadows. Functionally, this is just DK Pass to Dandelion Depths to Moo Meadows, another 4-segment route that is just 3 routes stapled together. We do see that infamous red pipe from earlier, but this time, Dandelion Depths isn't even part of the experience, so the pipe loses all meaning, and this loss of meaning sort of extends to the rest of the route. By using Dandelion Depths as a mere junction point, they're basically watering down the significance of everything surrounding it. If you see the same landmark over and over and over again, it waters down how special it might be. And maybe that's why they're preserving the water down under Dandelion Depths. By letting us spend so little time down there, the devs have made Dandelion Depths feel more special. But now hold on, that's called artificial scarcity, and it's a bad thing. Don't buy diamonds. 139, Dino Jungle to Peach Beach. Once again, we find ourselves at the giant waterfall right between the Dino Jungle and the generic coastline. This time, however, the destination is Peach Beach, which looks better at a distance than Salty Speedway, and is also just a little bit more fun. 138. Away Oasis to Great Question Block Ruins. We're back with that foreclosed Yoshi's again, but this time we'll be heading to an actual good track. The savanna biome continues to be a bit disappointing. We don't even have the wild animals running alongside us this time, but at least we have a decent view of the exclusive giant waterfall. It kinda reminds me of Niagara Falls and how the United States owns the site of Niagara Falls that everyone likes looking at. Essentially, if you want to enjoy Niagara Falls, you have to stand on the Canada side. That's kind of how Giant Waterfall is. It's technically part of the savanna biome, but you only really enjoy it if you're going to Dino Jungle. Anyway, the next section is a bit too straight for some of the heterophobes in my audience, but I do like that it features thwomps, which are another surprisingly rare sight in this game. I like the long drive through the jungle, I like the ruins scattered about, and I like how this is the only time in the game where the floating question blocks actually feel like they're connecting to the upcoming route. Like, why is every Great Question Block Ruins route not covered with these things? And on top of Great Question Block Ruins being one of the best tracks in the game, this is the only route to feature the alligator. Look at him, he's such a lazy guy. I want to be friends. 137, Dino Jungle to Koopa Troopa Beach. Finally, a Dino Jungle starting line that doesn't suck. We're heading in a fully different direction this time, which means that those geysers that ruined our other routes are now something we can actually interact with. And it's awesome because it's just a cool little trick opportunity to start the route off strong. But it's a shame that you can only experience this if you're heading towards Koopa Troopa Beach, because that track is nobody's first choice. Of course, there are some dinos on the route. I think these ones are called Charlotte Brontes. They don't really do much outside of add to the atmosphere, but I'm glad they're here. I do find this next section rather pleasing. It's just a cute little pier that you can do tricks off of. And from there, we close things out by gliding over the choppy waters to Koopa Troopa Beach. While the recent update did change a lot of Koopa Troopa routes, the ones on the east side were relatively untouched. The only real change being 2 laps at the end instead of just 1. But honestly, it kinda makes sense that they wouldn't make any changes here. Between the pier and the glide section, I don't know where they would put anything else. 136, Cheep Falls to Choco Mountain. Here we have an actual good example of a 4-segment route. Our first area is completely unique, taking us on a tour of the autumn countryside. You can't really see it from the road, but we are in the general vicinity of the Moo Meadows biome. So there's maybe a little intentionality here. This route is not unique in the fact that it drives around the perimeter of Star Lake, but we're treating it kind of like a roundabout here, which makes it feel very different than just blatantly copying sections from shorter routes. Eventually, we meet up with the Moo Meadows to Choco Mountain route from way earlier in this ranking. So even though I didn't really like that route, this one at least has a lot more going on to justify its existence. In general, I can respect any long route that has something unique to set it apart, even if that unique thing is just a field of brown grass. 135, Whistle Stop Summit to DK Spaceport. I'm gonna be real, the rolling start is really bad here too. Low-key ruins the mushroom cup for me. I do like the aesthetics of this route, and the wooden twists and turns along the Arizona cliffside do feel reminiscent of Whistle Stop. The view of the river is also really nice. The transition into the Pinewood biome isn't horrible. I mean, we have plenty of pine trees on both sides of the jump. The real problem is that DK Spaceport is just sitting there. There's no particular reason for it to be here, unless you're arguing that this is like New Mexico somehow. The only thing that really foreshadows DK Spaceport is this ticket booth, which could really be there for anything. Fortunately, DK Spaceport is a crazy good track, and that alone makes up for so many of this route's deficits. 134, Shy Guy Bazaar to Desert Hills. This is by far the best way to get to Desert Hills. It's the only route that doesn't pass through Armadillo Junction to do so, and it's also the only one that lets you race on a normal, forward-facing Desert Hills lap. But also, it's the only route in the game where you're gliding under these giant sandworms that look like sandy charvargs but don't actually have a canon name. This is cool enough and definitely the highlight of the route, but I do also really dig this dark desert cave. I do have to admit that Desert Hills as a destination track does look pretty cool at night, but otherwise, ending at Desert Hills is the main thing dragging this one down. 133, Dandelion Depths to Boo Cinema. This route really knows how to make Boo Cinema feel like a significant destination track. We start with the red towers of the Parabitty construction biome, which is always a little bit more interesting than just standard Mushroom Kingdom. before passing through a tunnel and discovering the Haunted Woods. This area is cinematic and picturesque, and that moment when the cinema itself finally comes into view, well, it's Boo Cinema. 132, Starview Peak to Sky High Sundae. As usual, slope-based routes feel a lot better going downhill than going uphill. We have a great view of our destination as we descend the mountain, and at least this one half-pipe feels a bit more natural to use. The only real downgrade here is the penguins, which were already way too easy to dodge in the uphill route, but I don't think you'll even have a chance to interact with them if you're going downhill. They're just too fast. 131, Mario Circuit to Boo Cinema. This route is full of buses. And why? I have no idea. Somehow this is the most interesting thing about Mario Circuit, public transportation. But whatever. Things get so much more interesting when we finally turn that corner and enter those foggy woods. These woods are quiet, dark, and deep, and definitely haunted. And even if the destination is all style over substance, at least the route does a really good job building up this haunted aesthetic. 130, Mario Circuit to Toad's Factory. This is my least favorite way to exit Mario Circuit, as we're turning in the middle of a countdown and the fellas in the back don't even get a chance to straighten out. But maybe this is the lesser evil. If we started any further back, we'd have to hit this boost ramp mid-countdown instead, and you all know how I feel about that. Anyway, this route through the Mario countryside is cute, but still generic. I appreciate the smatterings of industrialization with the windmills, trains, power lines, and blip bugs, but the highlight for me is the high-octane entrance into the destination track. This ramp takes us right onto the roof of the factory, showing off a whole new angle of the track and maximizing the amount of time we get to spend on the actual course. 129, Toad's Factory to Airship Fortress. I think the Toad's Factory routes that start on the water kinda miss the point. Yeah, Toad's Factory does have a water section, but it's such a poor representation of what the factory's about that it's really easy to forget where we're starting. It's not even an interesting section. The water is too smooth to do tricks in, and it leads to a boring stretch of ashen wasteland. There's just nothing going on. Fortunately, everything comes together when we finally hit the castle. Even the straight lines here feel intentional, and there are actual enemies to watch out for, though I have literally never seen anyone get hit by a hammer bro. 128, Koopa Troopa Beach to Faraway Oasis. Compared to the reversed Oasis to Koopa Troopa route, this water section is incredibly boring. No purple fish, no gliding over it, just a straight line over some cresting waves. There's actually no gliding at all on the way back to Faraway Oasis. Instead, we take this alternate cliffside path that features a pretty sweet jump off of a very exclusive ramp. But is this what I've become? I ranked this course so much higher than its counterpart, and for what? One ramp that I had to record twice because lightning always strikes the moment I try to do anything cool in this game? Or am I unjustly punishing the other route for the sin of ending at Koopa Troopa Beach? You know what? Screw it. I'm switching their places. Points be damned. Enjoy rank 167, idiot. 127, Crown City to Mario Bros. Circuit. It's hard to rank a route like this one in a vacuum. Like, this is the route of Mario Kart World, and it's worth playing on for that reason alone. Not to spoil the rest of the list, but I did rank this one dozens of places lower than its more iconic forward-facing counterpart, and that's mostly due to the tracks themselves. Crown City as a destination track brings so much to the table, whereas the reversed Mario Bros. Circuit brings like, I don't know, a bag of tortilla chips and nothing else. 126, Great Question Block Ruins to Koopa Troopa Beach. This is another example of a long route that has the decency to feature at least 20 seconds of unique driving. We start with this ruined jungle that I love, which has more turns, ruins, and piranha plants than the Peach Beach and Salty Salty Speedway routes combined. It's the same route, just double it. Normally, this route would take us to Dino Dino Jungle, but we take a detour to see 3 piranha creepers. Cherish this moment, for this is the only unique part of the route. We merge with the Dino Dino Jungle to Faraway Oasis route, where elephants and giraffes watch from the sidelines, and then later merge with Faraway Oasis to Koopa Troopa Beach, where we race alongside zebras and drive along this pier. And even though this route does feature sections from other routes, it's a lot easier to forgive here, because A, we do have a unique section, remember the 3 piranha creepers, and B, all of these reused sections are generally pretty rare. Like, this boardwalk only shows up on 2 other pairs of tracks, so it feels like we're giving this area a second chance rather than just shamelessly reusing content. 125. Wario Stadium to Toad's Factory. Be honest, does anybody actually enjoy watching their character take this massive jump before the race even starts? To me, it is such a momentum killer. Like, we don't even take the jump properly, and then when we hit the ground, we visibly slow down. This is like the opposite of exciting. If we really wanted to start the race with a cool jump, we should have started the race before the jump so that it's the first thing the player gets to do. And it's sad that we're starting with such a heavy penalty because the rest of this route is really good. The ditch is filled with broken bridges, rusted metal, and graffiti, all adding to this dilapidated feeling of Wario Stadium. As we approach Toad's Factory, things do start to clean up a little bit, with the colorful crates and cranes doing a great job foreshadowing the upcoming track. I also just really appreciate the chain chomps being one of the few obstacles in the game that actually makes me think about where I'm going. Even if I'm not a big fan of the side entrance into Toad's Factory, I do really respect how distinct this route manages to be. 124. Cheep Falls to Peach Stadium. I have to commend the inclusion of Cheep Lake, which I think is one of the best landmarks a route could ask for. Just like Cheep Falls, it's a water section in an autumn biome full of these mysterious, unnamed fish. This is also one of the better routes when it comes to capitalizing on that Japanese aesthetic. Too bad it's all undercut by the route to Peach Stadium having the worst final lap in the game. Like, seriously, just imagine how high this route would rank if it didn't drop the ball at the very end. 123. Mario Circuit to Acorn Heights. There's this musical called Into the Woods, and it's about people who go into the woods, and how interesting things happen in the woods. So it shouldn't be a shock when I say that the route going into the woods is better than the one going out of the woods. The wigglers, the giant apple, and the massive tree all feel like a natural progression of an idea that culminates in something. Driving down the tree, seeing the apple and the wigglers, and then exiting to Mario Circuit doesn't feel like it's building to anything. And honestly, what is there to build to? Why would I waste my time playing 3 laps of Mario Circuit when I could play even 1 lap of Acorn Heights? 122. Bowser's Castle to Mario Circuit. This is our first instance of Bowser's Castle being listed anywhere on this ranking because Bowser's Castle is just that good. Tricking down a volcano and gliding under an arch of magma is really cool, as it turns out. Cool enough to convince me not to say anything else about starting the race in midair. Like, even though I hate the mechanics of it, I do have to acknowledge when it's contributing to the spectacle. But honestly, the worst thing about this route is that we start at such a high point that the route just keeps on getting less and less interesting as we go along. After exiting the castle and swimming through the Bone Zone, we find ourselves back in the Ashen Wasteland, which just doesn't have the atmosphere it needs to pull off the graveyard aesthetic it's going for. And then to finish it all off, we're back in the boring Central Biome and Mario Circuit. At least they had the decency to give us Mario Circuit 2 this time around. 121. Bowser's Castle to Wario Stadium. The Bowser's Castle starting section is still fantastic, but I'm not going to bring it up every single time. Instead, let's talk about what happens after we exit the castle. Now, you've probably caught on to the fact that I'm not super fond of the Ashen Wasteland biome, but I do kind of like what they've done with the place. The braziers, the scrap metal, and the power lines create a lot of visual clutter, and with the stadium looking like a factory on the horizon, the whole area has this industrial feel to it. Honestly, everything up to this point is really strong. My issues with this route actually start when we hit the final lap. Now, I like when routes try to shake up what the final lap is going to look like, but in this case, it just doesn't work. The architecture of Wario Stadium is very clearly built for certain kinds of wall riding and rail grinding, but put the track in reverse and suddenly none of it really works properly. These tricks are the main reason you'd want to go to Wario Stadium in the first place, so to take those away kind of feels bad. 120. Moo Meadows to DK Pass. Yet another route that uses Dandelion Depths as an unwilling middleman to create an extra long route that really doesn't need to exist. The only reason it ranks this high is because the individual pieces carrying it are competent. 119. Mario Circuit to Dry Bones Burnout. I've said before that the Ashland can be a little boring, and that's still true for the first chunk of this route. Sure, the candles and the dry bones foreshadow the ideas of the course, but it's still just a gray graveyard. But the visuals do pick up a little bit towards the end, and Dry Bones Burnout itself is such a good destination track that it makes the whole thing worth it. 118. Great Question Block Ruins to Dino Jungle. The driving might not be anything crazy, but the vibes are immaculate. The jungle ruins and the Dino Jungle are such a perfect match that the tunnel connecting them almost feels unnecessary. If there is a flaw, it's the weak middle segment, which would score a little higher if the T-Rex wasn't too busy aura farming to be an actual threat. 117. DK Pass to Starview Peak. The snowboarding theme is my favorite way the game represents DK Pass, but it doesn't feel quite as good when we're taking a route uphill. That being said, the log cabin area does feel cozy, and Starview Peak does a decent job looming overhead to remind you of your destination. Honestly, Starview Peak is so good at looming over things that it makes me wish the other tracks were like, you know, significant landmarks. 116. Starview Peak to Mario Circuit. We've seen Starview Peak to Dandelion Depths, and we've seen Dandelion Depths to Mario Circuit. This is just a mashup of those two courses, though this time it's missing that aesthetic connection we had between two blue water tracks. 115. Bowser's Castle to Choco Mountain. This is another 4-segment track with one unique stretch in the middle. We exit Bowser's Castle as if we're going to Wario Stadium, but then continue straight through the wasteland. There's nothing special here, except of course the girls reading this, and then there are a couple of jumps that reunite us with the route from Wario Stadium to Choco Mountain. It doesn't have quite the same amount of thematic solidarity that Wario Stadium to Choco Mountain had, but Bowser's Castle is no stranger to the industrial aesthetics that this route brings. 114. Moo Meadows to Dandelion Depths. Originally, I expected to rank this a little bit lower than its reverse counterpart, but the more I think about it, the more it seems like this version of the route is just a little more interesting. While I did enjoy entering through the back entrance, I can't justify giving bonus points for novelty when 3 other routes also use this back entrance. Meanwhile, this route follows the standard Moo Meadows path back to the exit, which isn't particularly unique either, but the driving is a lot more interesting. And, more importantly, there are actual cows on the road, which is like the main thing you want out of Moo Meadows. Throw in a Womp to add some biodiversity and a stronger destination track in Dandelion Depths, and the gap between these two routes grows wider. Maybe in another life I would give the cool back entrance even more points than it already got, but this time around I think I'm just gonna stick with my convictions. 113. Starview Peak to DK Pass. Or should I say, Mount Wario. This route speaks to that natural human desire of driving down a ski slope in your car. Jumping down from Starview Peak is satisfying enough on its own, but this open slope area feels like it's exactly what the 24-player routes were meant to do. A wide open section with split pathing down the mountain, it's nothing crazy, but at least it gives us something to think about. And also, it's perfectly on theme. The only reason this route isn't scoring way higher than this is that the driving isn't actually very interesting. Once you've chosen your path, it's a pretty straightforward shot down the mountain. It's like they forgot to include the little details that made the ski slope section of Mount Wario feel fun and dynamic. 112. Crown City to Moo Meadows. This is yet another 4-segment route with one unique section sandwiched in the middle. After the Crown City half tunnels, which the game calls covered roads for whatever reason, we face an extended drive through the countryside. I do like the little mushroom houses, but it makes you wonder, why are there no toads working in these fields? Is it just the off-season? Or is there something a little more sinister going on? 111. Shy Guy Bazaar to Choco Mountain. The outskirts of Shy Guy Bazaar aren't as colorful as the main track, but they do make for an interesting set piece and add a little diversity before we head deeper into the desert. This route features the rare desert pokies, which are so iconic that it's surprising they only show up twice. From there, we follow a tunnel into the Arizona biome, which is a classic A+ transition if I'm one to grade. This next area doesn't do anything uniquely interesting, but it does bring together a lot of nice visual elements. Flags, a bridge, some cacti, and finally a chocolate lake, which, well, you know how I feel about the chocolate swamp area. 110. Mario Circuit to Moo Meadows. You wouldn't think a route like this would have any sense of spectacle, but here we are, gliding over the rolling pastures like nobody's business. This is probably the best way to roll up to that silly cow course, as we not only have a big field of cows to enjoy, but we also get to take that back entrance through the barn. Like, what else could we possibly ask for? 109. Toad's Factory to Acorn Heights. This is it. the highest ranking track to feature that dreaded ash to lush forest transition that I hate. It ranks a little bit higher than its reverse counterpart for a couple of reasons. First of all, it has this glide truck that helps speed the final section along, and second of all, Acorn Heights is just a better destination track than Toad's Factory. The approach is better, the driving is better, and the theme is more thoroughly realized. 108, Dandelion Depths to Sky High Sundae. Just like its reverse, this route focuses on taking us through a snowy highway and into the mountains. But there's a really cool detail in this direction where Shy Guys will leap over the track as we drive. I like that these Shy Guys serve to remind us exactly where we are in relation to DK Pass, even if this area does come across as a generic extension of the winter biome. And for whatever reason, driving in this direction gives us a couple of extra speed boosts. I guess the devs just couldn't wait to show off that shimmering ice cave again. 107, Bowser's Castle to Toad's Factory. This route is really strong visually, with its epic volcanic descent and the industrial scenery alluding to the upcoming factory. I rank it a little bit lower than its reverse counterpart, simply because I don't like this side entrance. Ending with a boring water section, and then cutting down on our already brief Toad's Factory lap really takes away from an otherwise fantastic destination. 106, DK Spaceport to Whistle Stop Summit. I really appreciate this canyon side view, and I like the vibe of the unique entrance to Whistle Stop. The biggest difference between this route and its reverse is that the Whistle Stop starting line is really awkward. And also, I enjoy Whistle Stop as a destination marginally more than DK Spaceport. 105, DK Spaceport to Desert Hills. The sudden transition into the Arizona biome is softened by the pine tree visual through line, but even if it is still a bit awkward, it's totally worth it for that drive up the Arizona River. This isn't the only time we'll see this river, but it's a refreshing and distinct deviation from the otherwise arid zone that surrounds it. Driving upriver is always a little awkward, and ending the route with Armadillo Junction into Desert Hills isn't exactly exciting, but the core experience here is unique enough to deserve this spot. 104, Crown City to Peach Stadium. This route is incredibly cohesive, starting on the bright coastline and driving ever so slightly inward to the colorful heart of the world. The gameplay is consistent throughout the entire route, and despite Peach Stadium parking lot being a bad track on its own, I can at least respect how cleanly it incorporates the identity of its connecting route, even if it is just more traffic. 103, Boo Cinema to Acorn Heights. This boardwalk has some of the tightest turns of any route, which makes it feel almost like the ghost of an old school track persevering. The unfortunate trade-off is that this boardwalk leads to a really drab haunted forest section that doesn't at all live up to its potential. Like, we've seen what they can do with the main route out of Boo Cinema, so why does this one drop the ball so much? This route does have that dead log I keep talking about, and it is still a great transition, but it's somehow the only visual highlight of this entire route before we get to the pond at the base of the tree. There are some good ideas here, but there is the sense that they could have pushed the idea of a haunted forest just a little bit further. 102, Desert Hills to Shy Guy Bazaar. It shouldn't be a surprise that the awesome Sandworm route is a lot better when the destination track is actually good and not Desert Hills. 101, Dry Bones Burnout to Boo Cinema. These two courses have incredible synergy, gray biomes filled with undead enemies. So it's baffling that we find ourselves passing through the completely unrelated Acorn Heights biome as we go from one to the other. Like, you would expect these two biomes to be deeply connected to each other, like Squid Game on a pizza. So this middle section just feels completely out of place. But also, this is one of the most unique 4-segment routes in the game. This forest section is gorgeous, and honestly looks better than some of the normal Acorn Heights routes. 100, Moo Meadows to Crown City. Another reverse track that's mostly identical to its counterpart, except this one starts with the awkward hills of Moo Meadows and ends with the rare Crown City water lap. Also, this route consistently has boxes parachuting from the sky, which you would think would be like an RNG thing that could happen on any route, but actually it's not random at all. It's a consistent element that shows up on a limited selection of routes, which is kind of disappointing. Having random elements like parachute boxes would make each route feel a bit more volatile and replayable. I don't know, maybe they fix it with a parachute box DLC down the line. 99, Peach Stadium to Moo Meadows. Maybe it's the pink coloring, maybe it's the extra food trucks, or maybe it's the Chain Chomp running loose in the circle. but this courtyard has identity, and I consider it one of the most memorable landmarks in the game. The star-shaped lake is also special, probably, but that's a bit harder to appreciate when we never drive around the whole thing. The flower gardens on the side of the road create a sense of plant cultivation, which is sort of reminiscent of the farmland we'll be seeing once we arrive at Wodim. 98. Peach Stadium to Crown City. The focus on traffic between these locations makes for a really cohesive experience, which is elevated by the fact that we're ending at Crown City instead of Peach Stadium this time. 97. Salty Salty Speedway to Dino Jungle. The giant waterfall is infused with a sense of adventure, which is why it's a much stronger set piece when it's leading us somewhere interesting. I'm not saying that Salty Salty Speedway or Peach Beach are bad destinations, but I am saying they're not half as exciting as Dino Jungle. Like, there's a parasaur flying overhead, T-Nex wandering through the trees, and that's just the pre-race sample. Dino Jungle, if I haven't said it already, is an absolute banger of a destination track. 96. Dino Jungle to Great Question Block Ruins. This route ranks a bit higher than its reverse counterpart, and it's not just because the final track is a little bit stronger. It's because earlier, it felt like the T-Rex was trying to orofarm without causing any actual problems. Here, it feels like he's trying to say goodbye. 95. Toad's Factory to Dry Bones Burnout. Driving up the steep river is an interesting visual, but it doesn't feel great to be working against the flow of the waterfall. This isn't Zora Kart. That being said, the Fishbone Zone continues to be iconic, and I'll never stop saying that Dry Bones Burnout is a great destination track. 94. Faraway Oasis to Salty Salty Speedway. This is one of the more dynamic routes through the savannah, featuring bridges, rivers, and stampeding buffalo. The transition to green grass is a bit sudden, but that doesn't matter nearly as much as taking this river through the back entrance of Salty Salty Speedway and gliding across the coastal city. I love that this water connects the route to the track, but I especially love being able to make an entrance. 93. Faraway Oasis to Cheep Falls. We're starting off in the same general direction as Faraway Oasis to Salty Salty Speedway, but instead of the awkward transition into a green coastal biome, we take a left and make a shockingly smooth transition into the orange autumn biome. The shift from yellow to orange grass is really subtle, and the trees are sparse enough that they just don't give anything away. Then we have this pleasant drive up the riverside, which feels like a natural runoff of the Cheep Falls that make up our destination. It all feels very intentional and tidy. 92. Mario Circuit to Dandelion Depths. There are a lot of small factors that make this route feel more fun than its nearly identical reverse route. The Mario Circuit starting line is less annoying, the route itself has a glide truck and a womp that the reverse doesn't have, and Dandelion Depths is a more interesting looking landmark than Mario Circuit. Finally, one lap of Dandelion Depths is way more interesting than any lap of Mario Circuit. 91. Toad's Factory to Dandelion Depths. This whole top area of the map is nothing but polyamorous routes. Here we have Toad's Factory to Moo Meadows to Dandelion Depths. Like, at this point, I can't even feel that bad. If Dandelion Depths is gonna play like this, then he deserves to be the third wheel for all those other routes. Except, wait a second, this isn't the route from Toad's Factory to Moo Meadows. Those two routes share a completely different route a little further south. Sorry, Dandelion Depths, I never meant to doubt you. And actually, I do really like this route. We have the springs into note blocks that I mentioned earlier in the Toad's Factory to Mario Circuit section, and this road through the countryside is just really cute. 90. Whistle Stop Summit to Crown City. This is an example of a route that is really good in one direction and then just kind of okay in the other direction. It's not bad by any means. I mean, I still hate this rolling start, but I can't stay mad at an Arizona track. Look at those pretty mountains. There are a lot of grinding opportunities here, and I want to believe that this is supposed to be a mechanical callback to Whistle Stop Summit, but they really could have come up with some more natural ways to implement this idea. Power lines are so ubiquitous that I gloss over them in these recaps, and these fences with blocks over them are clearly meant for tricking, but they're kind of out of the way and somewhat difficult to use consistently. That being said, I do respect how this route tries to give us some fun opportunities to an otherwise straight path. The last section is just your standard desert entrance to Crown City, which is fine because it leads to that rooftop section that I like. 89. Salty Salty Speedway to Cheep Falls. It's hard to get excited about this route when I just know the reverse is going to be so much better. Like, the coastal section is fine. The autumn section with feathers on the ground is fine. The underwhelming highway section that is unique to this route but doesn't have any interesting traffic is fine. Middle of the pack, whatever. But Cheep Falls to Salty Speedway? I await your return with diligence. 88, Crown City to Koopa Troopa Beach. Even before the update, I thought this route was pretty cool. I mean, we've got giant manta rays to trick off of. How can you look at a route with giant manta rays to trick off of and think the whole thing is bad? The moment-to-moment gameplay here is way more interesting than just weaving past some light traffic. And the updated version of this route is just better, making the manta rays way more accessible and adding way more glide opportunities. Unfortunately, the added clutter on the sidelines doesn't do much to make this route look any less bland than it did before. 86, Dry Bones Burnout to Toad's Factory. If I had to choose a destination between these two tracks, I'm usually picking Dry Bones Burnout. But if I had to choose which way to drive on a river slope, I think it's better to go downhill, downriver towards Toad's Factory. Momentum is just so important. With the burning candles and the giant ribcage hanging overhead, this is the Ashen biome at its most interesting. And with a respectable approach to Toad's Factory, this route has more of the DNA of both tracks that it connects, while the reverse feels like it's only focusing on Dry Bones Burnout. 85. Sky High Sunday to Salty Speedway. Most tracks are pretty much the same forwards and backwards, featuring similar obstacles and points of interest, which is why one-way tracks have so much potential to be unique and interesting. There's a lot of freedom in designing a route that only has to work in one direction. Unfortunately, this route from Sky High Sunday to Salty Speedway doesn't do anything particularly interesting with this opportunity. The first section is the same descent as the route to Wario Shipyard. The last section is the same coastline drive as the route from DK Pass. Even the middle section, which is the part that would be unique, is shared with the route to Cheep Falls. And it's a double shame because this nearly unique middle section just doesn't have any sense of identity. There are tricks, traffic, and some respectable twists in the road, but there's just no sauce. And they can't even get the biome transition right. Despite having a clean jump from one segment to the next, which could disguise the transition, the snow line just extends a few extra yards for no particular reason. 84. Desert Hills to Crown City. We've talked about the reverse of this route before, 4 segments, basically just a mashup of 3 other desert routes. Those routes are competent, but they're not bringing anything new to the table. And of course, just like that last route from Desert Hills to Guy Bazaar, it should be no surprise that ending at Crown City is a lot better than ending at Desert Hills. 83. DK Pass to Wario Shipyard. The transition from Snowy Mountain to Sunny Coastline is as abrupt as ever, but it's especially baffling here. Wario Shipyard is right on the border of the icy biome, which means it should be easy to make a single biome route without any jarring transitions. The route from Sky High Sunday did it, but whatever. I still love how dangerous this second segment feels, with the water crashing against the rocks as we approach the broken holes of that infamous shipyard. Ooh, it just feels so good. 82. Toad's Factory to Bowser's Castle. Every route to Bowser's Castle ends in pretty much the same way, climbing up the volcano and launching into one of the best tracks in the game. The main difference, then, is in how they start, and Toad's Factory is really underwhelming. There's some swerving, a brief water section, and then a couple of boring turns through the Ashen Wasteland. There are some cranes and crates here to remind us of where we are, but this section feels like it's trying to get out of the way as soon as possible, which is probably a good thing since Big Donut is a much more interesting location anyway. 81. Cheep Falls to Starview Peak. This 4-segment route takes us from the autumn biome into a tunnel that ends in the winter biome, which is an elegant way to make an otherwise jarring transition. This is the only route that follows this tunnel in this direction, and it leads to a highway section that no other route uses regardless of direction. So despite being a little bit longer than normal, Cheep Falls to Starview Peak justifies its own existence by having unique sections that you can look forward to driving on. And of course, the snowboarding section up the mountain is iconic, even if we're not starting or ending at DK Pass. 80. Moo Meadows to Peach Stadium. The reverse of an earlier route takes us right back around Star Lake and into Peach's courtyard. The big difference here is that Peach Stadium, the good one, is so much better than Boo Boo Meadows. Yeah, that's right, I called it Boo Boo Meadows. You gonna cry to your mom now? Boo Boo Meadows. 79. Crown City to DK Spaceport. I love routes that feature the unused parts of the main course. In this case, we get to see a little bit more of Crown City before following the coastline to the Pinewood area. The view is pleasant enough, but of course the highlight is going to be that extra long DK Spaceport finale. 78. Wario Stadium to Crown City. The first 2/3 of this extra long route is just Wario Stadium to Mario Bros. Diner again, including these awful metallic lumps in the ground that ruined the starting lineup and also my day. The key difference is this third segment, which takes us across some bridges in a unique riverside route that has some sloppy biome transitions, but also some memorable scenery. That being said, I don't know if you remember when I was complaining about how Wario Stadium thematically matches up so well with the back alleys of Crown City, but because it's a desert route, it has to take the rooftop lap of its destination. Now, I'm not penalizing this route for missing its potential, but had it achieved its potential, it would find itself so much higher on this list. 77. Starview Peak to Boo Cinema. These icy roads give us a great view as we descend down the mountain. The transition from snow to swamp is surprisingly more natural than you might expect. An ominous forest with dead trees and evergreens feels way more winter adjacent than a bright, sunny coastline. The boardwalk section at the end of the route is also very cool, broken up in such a way to make the trick opportunities feel natural while also adding to the foreboding atmosphere. 76. Choco Mountain to Shy Guy Bazaar. This is the reverse of another 4-segment course from earlier in the list. Not only is the destination track a lot stronger this time, but this gliding section in the middle adds some really nice variety to an otherwise uninspiring route. 75. Mario Circuit to Starview Peak. To absolutely no one's surprise, Dandelion Depths is once again acting as the middleman between two other tracks. The poor dude is so busy setting his friends up on dates that he's completely neglecting his own needs. There's a lesson in there. 74. Wario Shipyard to DK Pass. Even though I generally rank Wario Shipyard a little bit higher than DK Pass as a destination track, I do have to admit that driving in this direction is just more fun. The angle of the broken ships gives us some one-way trick opportunities, and while I usually dislike driving uphill when I could be driving downhill, the snowball obstacle is really only a threat when it's rolling towards you. Also, the mountain is cleverly shaped so you can see the DK Pass sign from all the way down here. It's not as iconic of a landmark as Starview Peak, but it's also a more interesting destination than Starview Peak, so maybe it balances out. 73. Desert Hills to Whistle Stop Summit. This is my second favorite Armadillo Junction route. I know this section is a little overused, but with the tricking opportunities out of the desert and the train overhead foreshadowing the upcoming course and the destination being the incredible Whistle Stop Summit, this is just an all-around solid route. 72. Koopa Troopa Beach to Crown City. The manta rays used to be the stars of this route, but after the route update, the dolphins are absolutely mogging them. The dolphins used to be exclusive to the Wario Shipyard and Salty Salty Speedway route, but the devs must have realized that dolphins are worth like 3 extra points in my ranking system and wanted to score as high as possible with this one. The update also added some ramps to the formerly boring sandbar, and then grouped the manta rays together into this nice little pod, making them way easier to trick on. Visually, this route is about as generic as the other water routes, but I do love the city skyline and seeing the Crown Bridge standing firm on the horizon. 71. Great Question Block Ruins to Faraway Oasis. Revisiting familiar landmarks from a new angle is always fun, so long as you can actually see the landmark. Jumping off the giant waterfall from the Dino Jungle routes is a really cool concept, but the view is just kinda bland. It's cool that we get to see the destination track sitting on the horizon, but the savanna biome itself mostly amounts to dry grass and brown water. But even if I do think this route could be a lot stronger visually, I do love the concept. Jumping off a giant waterfall is really cool, as it turns out. And this river has a very distinct visual identity with all these block ruins scattered everywhere. 70. Choco Mountain to Toad's Factory. It turns out the best way out of Choco Mountain is through Choco Mountain. Rather than leaving through the uninspiring chocolate swamps, we simply play the first half of the track, take a hard right, and then climb directly out of the pit. For as much as I love Choco Mountain slander, I will give credit where it's due. This is a phenomenal way to start a route. There's simply no better way to respect the starting track than to start on the starting track. As for the rest of the route, It's fine, just more Toad's Factory slop. 69. Mario Bros. Circuit to Whistle Stop Summit. My number 1 Armadillo Junction track is still pretty standard. Power lines, grolls, blip bugs. Wait, isn't Blipbug a Pokemon? Huh. Yeah, okay, these guys are called signal bugs. Well, as someone who gets annoyed when people mistakenly call these routes intermission tracks, I should adjust my vocabulary based on the new information I just now learned. Anything else would be staggering hypocrisy. 68. Toad's Factory to Mario Bros. Circuit. This lengthy route takes us out of Toad's Factory and onto the longest highway in the game. And it's not just long, it's busy. Heavy traffic, restaurants, giant vehicles to commandeer, and once we're done here, we take this narrow canyon deeper into Arizona and onto Mario Bros. Circuit. Maybe this highway isn't as idyllic as the iconic Mario Bros. To Crown City highway, but there's so much decision making going on at any given moment that I can't rank it that much lower. 67. Whistle Stop Summit to Koopa Troopa Beach. This one-way route takes us from the best course in the game to the worst. I do like this canyon view, and I especially like getting to drive down this Arizona River, even if it is just for the last few moments of the biome. This last water section used to be particularly boring, even among straight lines, but the update kept the one good thing, the giant whale, and added dolphins, turns, and a speedboat to make the whole thing feel a lot less homogeneous. 66. Mario Bros. Circuit to Crown City. What can I say? This is the Mario Kart World route. The red mushroom mountains in the background, the long stretches of open road, it's picturesque. But it's not perfect. The transition into the Crown City biome is still abrupt, and there's just not as much going on. But I think that's okay. As an introduction to everything routes are supposed to stand for, I think simple and memorable does the job perfectly fine. 65. Peach Beach to Dino Dino Jungle. This route hits all the same important landmarks as Salty Salty Speedway to Dino Dino Jungle, except the dinosaurs in the jungle are different. In this case, we're dealing with Triceratops, which you can do tricks off of. It's much better than these giraffes, which are facing the wrong direction to be useful. But there are also a couple of other cute details that elevate Peach Beach. Cataquacks, bubbles dropping items, and also not fumbling the starting line. 64. Mario Circuit to Bowser's Castle. Normally, I would write this one up as another 4-segment track where Mario Circuit is third-wheeling to Dry Bones and Bowser, but that feels a little disingenuous. Yes, the first section is Mario Circuit to Dry Bones Burnout, and yes, the last section is Dry Bones Burnout to Bowser's Castle. And yeah, the only unique stretch takes us right across the Fishbone Zone, which is an area that already sees plenty of use. But the unique thing about the Fishbone Zone is that you can cross it in so many different directions, and despite being a water zone, the land formations make each direction feel distinct. Something about this particular route makes it feel less like Mario is trying to mooch off of Dry Bones, and more like Mario is trying a different path that happens to go in the same direction. I'm not a huge fan of the generic route through Green Hill Zone, but it's such a small fraction of the experience that it doesn't end up mattering very much. Like, we're going to Bowser's Castle. Of course the route is going to focus on driving into enemy territory. 63. Boo Cinema to Starview Peak. The broken sections of track are still fun to trick on, and the transition from spooky to cold still feels natural. But for me, this route is all about Starview Peak looming overhead. It's there for the entire ascent, and they even reworked the starting boardwalk section to have as much time as possible with our destination on screen. And it looks so ominous here somehow, perfectly fitting in with the spooky vibes of Boo Cinema. I know it's not geographically feasible for every single route to have its destination looming overhead, but I do wish it were a little more common. 62. Dry Bones Burnout to Wario Stadium. Despite being another apparent victim of the 4-segment curse, this is the only route from Dry Bones Burnout to feature this big donut section of Bowser's Castle. I guess that counts as being a little unique. But then we take the back entrance into Wario Stadium, which means a backwards lap of Wario Stadium. And I've already expressed to you that the backwards laps of Wario Stadium are not very good. 61. Airship Fortress to Toad's Factory. I don't know what could possibly be more hype than gliding through an active war zone. The explosions here are always perfectly timed to accentuate our exit from the airship. The scenery is fantastic, and everything just feels so energetic. And then we exit through the front gate and go to Toad's Factory for some reason. I mean, don't get me wrong, Toad's Factory is a good destination track. It just doesn't quite fit the explosive energy this route was giving off. 60. Wario Stadium to Dry Bones Burnout. This is only the third worst starting line at Wario Stadium, and it's still pretty bumpy. It's another 4-segment track with nothing unique about it, this time taking us from Wario Stadium to Bowser's Castle to Dry Bones Burnout. Fortunately, the aesthetic identity stays relatively consistent, taking us through different shades of grays with plenty of visual variety to keep things interesting. 59. Peach Stadium to Cheep Cheep Falls. Remember way earlier when an otherwise great route ended up ranking pretty low for ending at Peach Stadium? Well, that same route is now thriving, thanks to a hidden technique we like to call having an actual good track at the end. In case you forget why I like this route so much, it all comes down to Cheep Cheep Pond. It's a cute little alcove, acting both as a simulacrum of the upcoming course, and also being a somewhat natural transition into the autumn biome. Like, there are cleaner transitions out there, but at the very least, this one has the decency to give us a clear boundary. 58. Shy Guy Bazaar to Wario Stadium. This route follows the same path as the route to Choco Mountain, taking us through city outskirts and pokey-filled hills. But we diverge right after the tunnel, following these metal gateway structures to yet another tunnel that leads us right up to the front of Wario Stadium. Those metal structures are somewhat reminiscent of our destination. Entering through the front door gives us a few extra moments of Wario Stadium before the final lap. Nothing crazy happens on this route, but it is pretty solid all around. 57. Mario Bros. Circuit to Toad's Factory. Just to reiterate how dense this particular highway is, I had to record this route 3 times before I felt like I'd covered all of my bases. There's so much going on, and Toad's Factory is a fantastic way to cap it all off. 56. Dandelion Depths to Toad's Factory. This is mostly just the reverse of Toad's Factory to Dandelion Depths, except this time, after driving through the countryside, passing some blip bugs, and going through the tunnel, we get to take the awesome flotation ramp up to the roof of Toad's Factory, which is still by far the best entrance. 55. Moo Meadows to Cheep Cheep Falls. The path around Star Lake that would normally lead us to Peach Stadium takes a detour into a unique countryside section, which isn't anything groundbreaking, but it is pleasant enough. This entrance to the Cheep Cheep Pond landmark is also the best one, as it provides easier access to Yoshi's and is a bit more concise, which is really important in a straight line water section. 54. Toad's Factory to Choco Mountain. Earlier, I talked about how the one truly great exit from Choco Mountain was the route to Toad's Factory. The same is even more true in reverse. Tricking down this hill is an incredible way to start this track. It feels like jumping into a mud pit, which is exactly what this version of Choco Mountain is trying to make you feel. And unlike a course like Toad's Factory, where the side entrance makes the final lap feel a little bit shorter, this entrance counts as part of the second segment, essentially giving us an extra half lap of the main course. I may not be a fan of 1 lap of Choco Mountain, but 1.5 laps of Choco Mountain? Maybe we're cooking something. If more routes ended like this, I think the entire conversation about destination tracks feeling too short would be entirely different. People would still prefer their 3-lap courses, but I think the routes would feel like they're doing less damage this way. 53. DK Pass to Cheep Cheep Falls. This snow route isn't super iconic, but it does have a couple of unique landmarks worth noting. Well, one unique landmark, the stairs leading out of this river. I don't really have anything else to say about it, I just like the way it looks. And it only shows up on the route to Cheep Cheep Falls, so it gets bonus points for being rare. This path leads to a highway tunnel, which perfectly disguises the shifting seasons into the autumn biome. I'm not the biggest fan of this final stretch where Koopas drop feathers onto the road, but I mean it's top 50, they can't all be winners. But like, that's not very encouraging, is it? The top 25% of routes aren't even consistently good. 52. Sky High Sunday to Wario Shipyard. This is the most unique route to Wario Shipyard, giving up the sunny coastlines in favor of frozen glaciers. I don't think it's a perfect transition. Wario Shipyard is more about craggy rocks than dangerous icebergs, and the weather on this route shifts from snow to rain a little too quickly, but the concept is fine. There's also a Typhoon on this route, and it's actually doing something this time, stirring up the waves and acting as a sort of guardian. I also appreciate the crumbling ruins around here, implying some kind of magnificent structure that was eroded by the waters of time. In some ways, it feels like a mirror to Airship Fortress, two crumbling castles on opposite sides of the map. 51. Desert Hills to Koopa Troopa Beach. This used to be one of the few 5-segment routes in the game, but now that Koopa Troopa Beach routes have an extra destination lap, this route has become the only 6-segment route in the game. And honestly, I think it deserves the recognition. This route feels like an adventure. Passing through Armadillo Junction is fine, but the highlight of this route is driving downriver through this gorgeous ravine. We've seen this particular river a couple of times already on this list, but this right here is the best way to experience the full thing. Now, I have some mixed feelings on this water section. The December update added a bunch of new elements to make the route faster and more dynamic, but it also limited our options to some extent. The original route had a sort of wide-open charm to it, where it felt like the racers could spread out and do their own thing, and then it followed that up with a nice chill glide section and a giant whale. The updated route feels like it's rushing the glide sections to get to the next area as quickly as possible, which also has the effect of making each water segment feel completely disconnected from the rest. We're not dealing with straight lines anymore, but our choices do feel more linear. And worst of all, there's no whale. I do like the new elements, especially this helicopter section that has glide panels for anyone who happens to miss their ride. It makes the sandbar section much more bearable than the original route, so this update is a direct upgrade in some ways. But personally, I don't think this section needed a complete overhaul. 50. Boo Cinema to Dry Bones Burnout. This is the final route of the Leaf Cup, and it also marks the first time where I really thought a route was weird. Why do we go from gray to green to gray again? It's baffling. But we already talked about all of that in the reverse route. This one scores higher than its counterpart for having a better destination. 49. Whistle Stop Summit to Choco Mountain. This route starts with a pretty generic desert backroad that we've already seen a couple of times. But as we continue our trek, our path is interrupted by a massive Category 2 tornado, like what they have in Nebraska. I don't think any other route can quite live up to the shock value of seeing the tornado for the first time. It's such an out-of-place obstacle in a Mario Kart game that you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. The rest of the route feels very basic by comparison, and the tornado does feel a little bit less novel when you realize that it's a permanent fixture of the track and not just some random event. But it's still a memorable and unique moment that elevates the entire experience. 48. DK Spaceport to Mario Bros. Circuit. We're following the same path up the river that brought us to Desert Hills, but this time Armadillo Junction points us to an actual good track. Too bad it's the backwards version again. They should call this one Luigi Bros. Circuit, so everyone knows it's the inferior version. Sorry, Luigi. I just feel like you're not properly represented in this game, that's all. 47. DK Spaceport to Koopa Troopa Beach. I love the water exit for DK Spaceport. You thought you were done with the giant robot from last course? Sorry! He loves you, he misses you, and he wants to say goodbye. I think this moment is a super cool send-off that makes the other spaceport exits feel horribly bland by comparison. Unfortunately, the scenery on the way to Koopa Troopa Beach just isn't anything to write home about. There aren't even manta rays this time, which feels like a baffling exclusion given that they usually show up on this side of the bay. But whatever. Even the update didn't do as much for this route as it probably could have. Yes, the driving is a little more interesting, but honestly not by much. If anything, the best update this route got was in the Spaceport section, where a couple of ramps and boost panels were added to help spice things up a little bit. Bafflingly, these changes do not show up on DK Spaceport to Peach Stadium, the other route to exit in this exact same direction. Does this mean they're planning more updates for the future, or did they just forget about this one? 46. Crown City to Faraway Oasis. Crown Bridge is about as fun as you can get for driving in a straight line. The road is packed with all kinds of useful traffic, and there are alternate routes up the sides of the bridge that can lead to some fun grinding and gliding opportunities. It would be nice if the bridge's architecture made it easier to get onto the side rails, especially considering how easy it is to get knocked off by the person behind you, but otherwise I consider this bridge to be worth the drive every time. 45. Koopa Troopa Beach to Dino Jungle. The starting straightaway is a little boring, but the choppy waves give us some nice trick opportunities, and this pier is still quite pleasant and surprisingly distinct in a game with more water routes than Hoenn. This path into the jungle has so much going on, with dinos in the road and a fantastic view of the laboratory as we approach. This is also the only route to feature this unique entrance to the track, taking us backwards across the starting line and around the outskirts before throwing us right back onto the main course. The T-Rex is a nice touch, and interesting enough, this is the only track besides the Bad Peach Stadium to provide dash food during the final lap. There's some novelty here for sure, but personally I do prefer the standard forward-facing entrance. 44. Sky High Sundae to Cheep Cheep Falls. This is a lot like the route from Sky High Sundae to Salty Salty Speedway, except it diverts to follow this route from DK Pass to Cheep Cheep Falls. But rather than feeling like two routes stapled together, it feels more like these routes just happen to cover the same ground. We never get close enough to DK Pass to make it feel like a middleman, so this just feels like an extra long route that happens to cross 3 biomes. And I don't know, maybe we call this winter, summer, fall, and pretend there's some kind of seasonal synergy here. 43. Mario Bros. Circuit to Wario Stadium. This seems like the main exit from Mario Bros. Circuit, and while it is mostly not interesting, it does lead to this narrow canyon section that I do quite like. I also like this tunnel, and this bridge, and this ravine, and how everything leads right into the front entrance of Wario Stadium. It's a really nice approach, and this angle gives us a few extra moments to appreciate the inside of the stadium before lap 3. 42. Choco Mountain to Wario Stadium. This route fixes the main problems of its reverse Wario Stadium to Choco Mountain, namely Wario Stadium's awkward start, and the fact that I just don't like Choco Mountain as a destination. We still have the thematic connection between the two monster truck arenas, and we still have the visual hints of slapdash construction that define these courses. To me, this is a straight upgrade, keeping all the things I do like about the route while getting rid of what I don't. 41. Dry Bones Burnout to Bowser's Castle. Pairing the two lava-themed tracks together is such a no-brainer, but this route mixes things up with the Fishbone Zone. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I just love this aesthetic. Despite being a water route, the glowing rocks and rising steam help it feel like a natural part of the volcano biome. This particular angle brings us in through a giant imposing gate, which leads directly into the volcano section without bothering with standard castle procedures. Even though part of me really wishes they'd gone all in on an incredible lava-themed route, I do respect the variety on display. 40. Acorn Heights to Dandelion Depths. This is probably my favorite river in the game. It has such a gentle flow, under the shade of giant plants hanging overhead. While this route is uphill, the incline is so gentle that it's really not that big of a deal. Boxes floating down the river, items popping out of bubbles, and the gliding section in the second half all work together to make this upriver section feel a bit less slow. This is also the first route in the entire ranking to give the Dandelion Depths Underground the extra emphasis that it deserves. 39. Peach Stadium to Toad's Factory. Nothing here stands out as super exciting, but it is all solid, and we do find ourselves driving on some unique sections. For example, Star Lake. Usually we drive on the east side, but this time we drive on the west side. Yippee! After that we have like 10 seconds of driving before we merge with the established Moo Meadows to Toad's Factory route. It ranks higher than Moo Meadows to Toad's Factory because Peach Stadium as a starting point does so much to elevate the experience. 38. Crown City to Wario Stadium. This route sent me down a rabbit hole. Despite having the same starting lineup as other routes in the desert, this one happens to have like 4 mushroom trucks all in a row. I tested again and again, and yes, they are always here. There's always a line of 4 mushroom trucks on this side of the road, and an enemy car of some kind on the other side of the road. As far as I can tell, this is the only time something like this happens. Some vehicles, like trucks with ramps, do tend to be consistent fixtures on a route, but cars that drop items or carry enemies aren't usually this consistent. Like, there's definitely an element of RNG to most types of traffic. It seems like the developers saw this 4-segment route and decided it was too long, so they gave us the tools to speed through the early section as fast as possible. But why this route? This is not the only 4-segment route in the game. It's not even the only 4-segment route to start at Crown City. Like, I know this is a really weird thing to get caught up on, but this route forced me to spend hours evaluating how traffic even works in this game, and I'm still not sure I totally understand it. 37. Cheep Cheep Falls to Salty Salty Speedway. Cheep Falls was all about following the flow of water down the track, so it's perfectly fitting that this route follows the same flow of water down the river to the next track. Like, come on, the river connecting two water tracks is just perfect. And of course, this river leads us to the back entrance of Salty Speedway, letting us glide over the city and take in the scenery before the final lap. 36. Wario Stadium to Bowser's Castle. The ashlands between Wario Stadium and Bowser's Castle are full of debris and braziers that seem a really appropriate transition between these courses. The volcano looms overhead, and while the central castle approach is pretty straightforward, it's a strong enough way to build up to the fast-paced climax of a final lap. 35. Toad's Factory to Wario Stadium. I'm still not terribly fond of the water sections surrounding Toad's Factory, but I am fond of these chain chomps rolling around the ditch. They're just so silly. But the best part by far has to be the ending, where we glide right into the heart of Wario Stadium. It's a great view of, and an extra half lap of one of the best courses in the game. 34. Bowser's Castle to Dry Bones Burnout. This is just our standard volcanic descent with a sharp turn at the Big Donut. It's a little interesting that this route takes a different path than its reverse, but you know what they say. All roads lead to the Bone Zone. Which, side note, is why Fishbone is way easier to unlock than everyone keeps saying. So many routes pass through here. Just play the game normally and he'll show up eventually. And even if you never unlock him, he has the exact same stats as Baby Rosalina. 33. Wario Stadium to Shy Guy Bazaar. This route is a serious contender for the worst starting lineup in the game. This is the one that starts us on the giant ramp that is not calibrated properly for the speed we're driving, and also noticeably destroys our momentum. Like, what's the point of all of that speed and spectacle if we're going to slow down immediately before the race even starts? It's a cutscene, and not a very good one. That being said, rank 33 is really good for a route with such a sloppy start. The first segment of this route is completely unique, and visually a little bit confusing. We're somehow on the cusp of not 2, but 3 biomes, with this brown cliff alluding to something greener far above. It gives us a great view as we trick down this hill, and somehow makes the sandy landscape transition feel incredibly natural. The main landmark here is the giant pit of quicksand. This particular angle of the sand pit isn't the best, I mean there's not even any chain chomps, but it is a cool landmark nonetheless. From here, we unite with the route from Airship Fortress to Shy Guy Bazaar, and out of respect for the Admiral, I think that's where we're gonna pause this discussion. We'll talk about the second half of this route later. 32. Wario Shipyard to Sky High Sundae. Sky High Sundae is just a better track than Wario Shipyard, and taking the scenic route up the mountain gives us a chance to really appreciate the boring white snow. This route has all the same basic elements as its reverse, but it just happens to have a little bit more sprinkled on top. That's a Sky High Sundae reference, I think. If there's anything this route does worse than its competitor, it's the view. Sky High Sundae's descent is very visually pleasing in a way that the mountain climb never fully lives up to. 31. Airship Fortress to Wario Stadium. As much as I like the Airship Fortress standard of gliding between two warring ships, this one feels a little bit off. Not only is this one of those take control mid-glide courses, but something about the angle of the ships just doesn't feel quite as cinematic. Maybe it's the elevation, or maybe the volcano in the background just does more work than I give it credit for. That being said, I really respect this route for taking a completely different approach regarding Airship Fortress. Instead of exiting through Bowser's Castle again, we find ourselves driving through the ruined outskirts. The rubble feels somber and a little bit intimidating in the way you would expect a follow-up to Airship Fortress to be. We also get another run through the Chain Chomp Ditch, which feels particularly dilapidated here. And of course, this ditch section leads to the best entrance to Wario Stadium. So despite the start being a little bit rough, this route really pulls itself together. 30. Choco Mountain to Bowser's Castle. As I've been making this list, I've been feeling kinda bad about how many Choco Mountain routes rank so much lower than their reverse counterparts. And then I play Choco Mountain and remember that I was right all along. If I want to drive in a muddy monster truck arena, Wario Stadium is right there. All this is to say that Choco Mountain to Bowser's Castle ranks a lot higher than Bowser's Castle to Choco Mountain for the simple fact that Bowser's Castle is a good track. Meanwhile, Choco Mountain can eat dirt, which probably tastes like chocolate, but like the gross kind you use for baking. 29. Dry Bones Burnout to Moo Meadows. Do you think two distant tracks can fall in love? Can a dry bone boy date a moo girl? This route seems to think so. Despite me giving penalties for this being 2 routes stapled together, there's just so much that this route does well that it's hard to justify ranking it any lower. It does so much to celebrate both the Dry Bones aesthetic and the Moo Meadow, and since Mario is just such a friendly, generic guy, he feels more like a wingman pushing his friends together, rather than the jealous third wheel that Dandelion Depths always seems to be. Also, those who know will know that I am always grinding this track in case it shows up on online versus. This didn't affect the ranking at all, but be warned. When this route finally shows up again on the random course selections, it's over for you. 28. Koopa Troopa Beach to DK Spaceport. Only 3 routes lead to DK Spaceport, and I think this is the best one, as this is the only route to actually let us explore the underbelly of the spaceport before going on to the actual track. And while it used to just be an over-glorified parking lot, the route update has added springs and boost panels to make things a little bit more interesting. The water section was also updated to be less of a straight line, and they also added this cool grinding opportunity with these floating beams. Maybe it doesn't perfectly match the spaceport aesthetic, but it does build on the ideas of DK Spaceport, and it makes the whole route feel like it's actually leading into something. 27. Salty Salty Speedway to Wario Shipyard. Do you like dolphins? Well, this is the only place you will ever see them. That's right, we've taken an entire endangered species and sequestered them to one specific route for go-karting purposes. Sorry activists, enjoy your 3 whales. Oh wait, I'm just now getting word that dolphins have reappeared near Koopa Troopa Beach, which is their natural habitat. So, congratulations everyone, Nintendo finally listened. We saved the dolphins. As for the route, I really do respect one water-based track leading right into another, and I really respect this route taking such a direct approach rather than following the coastline like so many others. You can do tricks off the dolphins who really don't seem to mind, though it is kind of hard to get the timing right. But even if you don't, the dolphins are just really fun to have around. 26. Wario Shipyard to Starview Peak. I'm not going to say that Mario Kart World is ripping off small indie studios, but I do think it's interesting that there's an entire route about climbing to the mountain's summit. Wario Shipyard is at sea level, about as low as you can go. But after passing through glaciers, winding up the mountain, navigating this icy cavern, and climbing the ski slope, we find ourselves launching our way up into the stars. Even if this is just a bunch of other routes stapled together, this 4-segment route stands out for having such a clear and consistent vision. Climb up mountain. 25. Bowser's Castle to Airship Fortress. These 2 tracks feel deeply connected, probably due to the castle biome's benevolent monarchy uniting everyone under its rule. Airship Fortress is half fortress after all, and if you follow Mario logic, one fortress is half the way to a castle. I guess that means Airship Fortress is 1/4 castle, maybe on its father's side. The castle wall section is pretty good, but the launch at the end feels a little disappointing. When you're driving in the other direction, it always feels like the explosions are announcing your arrival. But here, the timing is just off, like they're busy reloading their cannons the moment we pass by. 24. Starview Peak to Cheep Falls. We're basically using DK Pass as our middleman here, but I don't hate that. It gives us another chance to experience this massive snowboarding section that I love, and we get to revisit that cute little river that I'm also fond of. Like, this is probably my favorite horizontal river crossing in the entire game. Look how clean those stairs look against the snow. What, do most people not have favorite horizontal river crossings? 23. Choco Mountain to Cheep Falls. Peach Stadium hard carries this route. The swamp doesn't do anything interesting, and the final section is exactly like the route from Moo Meadows. But this section, right here in the middle, is the only time we can really appreciate an extended drive through the Peach Stadium biome, Chain Chomp Courtyard and all. And with the pink blossoms behind us, we can interpret the biome transition as a nice shift from spring to summer to fall. Like, this feels like a much more intentional seasonal shift than whatever the coastline was cooking. 22. Away Oasis to Crown City. We've covered Crown Bridge once before, but I think the route is just a little bit stronger in the other direction. Rather than spending the entire route in traffic and then ending in some unpopulated savannah landmark, the traffic makes a lot more sense as a sort of build-up to the grand city we're approaching. 21. Koopa Troopa Beach to Peach Stadium. You might remember that I ranked the reverse of this route much higher than a lot of other people would. Yes, the route is a mostly straight line, but I think it would be a disservice to ignore the gameplay variety it provides. And when you have that variety and you point it towards an actual competent track like Peach Stadium, suddenly we have a track that I genuinely think belongs in the top 25. Flying under Crown Bridge, Peach Stadium standing firm on the horizon, and then climbing and jumping directly onto the track? It's a spectacle, and it feels a lot better when we're not heading towards Koopa Troopa Beach. Oh, and the route update? Section 2 is now filled with vines to grind on, which instantly makes this route jump up like 20 places in my ranking. Like, even if these vines don't have anything to do with Peach Stadium or Koopa Troopa Beach, I'm just glad the devs are finally implementing the game mechanics into these routes. Turns out, this game can be pretty fun when it wants to be. 20. Mario Circuit to Peach Stadium. This route feels like it's cheating. It's the only route in the game that actually passes through one track on its way to another. And it brings up the question of why. Does Mario Circuit think it's special just because it's in the Special Cup? Well, yes. This is the second time Mario Circuit has broken the rules, taking on extra laps just to make the Special Cup feel more special. But clearly I don't hate it. This route ranks really high because I think it does its job very well. The idea is well executed. I'm fine with Moo Meadows having a nice little cameo as a treat. I do have some problems with the broader implications of this track, but I'm gonna save those for my closing thoughts. 19. Wario Shipyard to Salty Speedway. Remember the dolphins, the ones that are so wild and free and can go wherever they want? Well, what if they were swimming in the opposite direction, eh? Setting those beautiful, thriving dolphins aside, this is the best approach we have to Salty Speedway. No other route really emphasizes how pretty this city looks as a destination. Back in my edgelord days, I might have preferred the aesthetic of approaching the broken Wario Shipyard. But these days, I'm just too wholesome for that. And also, there are just more trick opportunities when you're driving in this direction. 18. Wario Stadium to Airship Fortress. We're starting with that big awkward hill again, but otherwise, this is a really solid route. We're back in the Chain Chomp Ditch, approaching the castle biome, climbing the rubble until we're finally high enough to glide right to Airship Fortress. I liked the reverse route too, but I just find driving in this direction to be a little bit more purposeful. 17. Airship Fortress to Shy Guy Bazaar. You definitely recognize this route from the Cloud Rally, but Knockout Tour doesn't tell the full story. I do hate this launch, of course. It's a bumpy, swerving funnel into a glide section. But this route is unique and just has so much going for it. The view here is great, and the giant pit of quicksand, an iconic Mario Kart staple, makes its only relevant appearance in the game. The palace is a great landmark to keep our sights on as we approach, and the bridge rails give us alternate ways across. But then we get to the actual Shy Guy Bazaar, full of twists and turns, and suddenly, the final lap? It's so easy to get lost in the chaos that you don't even realize how much extra time we get on this track. And the final lap is completely different from normal, focusing on the interior of this palace that would normally be considered a background detail. This, right here, is exactly the sort of shakeup that most routes should be aiming for. Or if that's too much to ask, maybe like 20%? 15? 16. Cheep Falls to Wario Shipyard. This route has a really good view of the coast, and the coastline entrance to Wario Shipyard is one of my favorite areas in the game. Maybe the autumn section is a little boring, and maybe the coastline is a bit overused, but that doesn't stop this route from being a generally pleasant time. 15. Wario Shipyard to Peach Beach. I consider this to be one of the cleanest biome transitions in the entire game. It might not seem too crazy to go from one water track to another, but the vibes are incredibly important. Where Wario Shipyard is foreboding and dangerous, Peach Beach is calm and laid back, something that is perfectly reflected in the route itself. Section 1 is jagged and ominous, but these islands right here are a gateway to calmer waters. We pass between these cliffs and see a broken ship on the beach, a solemn callback to the shipyard we just passed. But this route really isn't about the ship. It's about these calm, peaceful islands. Wario Shipyard made the ocean feel brutal and uncaring, but this route gives the sense that nature is beautiful, and that it persists despite the messes we might leave on its shores. It's poetic and invites introspection. And wait, is that Slifer the Sky Dragon? Sonic Cross Worlds wishes it had this kind of firepower. Unfortunately, after spending their entire budget on one Yu-Gi-Oh cameo, the devs just didn't have the funding to finish this route. There's just nothing else here. I know the placid, tranquil waters are supposed to be emblematic of the laid-back resort theme, but thematic consistency doesn't change the fact that it's a straight line over calm water. Speaking of straight lines across water, let's talk about Rainbow Road. And let's just be so for real right now. The route from Peach Stadium to Rainbow Road is less than half of Peach Stadium to Koopa Troopa Beach, widely regarded as one of the worst routes in the game. If you think Peach Stadium to Rainbow Road is somehow a top 3 route, you've kind of fallen for the hype. Yes, Rainbow Road in a vacuum is really good, but we're focusing on routes today, not individual tracks. And what does this route have, really? Atmosphere? Spectacle? The light show is so important that Rainbow Road will always take place at night. It's the only track in the game to do something like this. So despite blatantly retreading a different course, the overall experience is so much more focused and exciting. Of course it's gonna place higher than Koopa Troopa Beach. That's why I'm ranking Rainbow Road 86. Better luck next time. 14. Dandelion Depths to Acorn Heights. Actually, now that I say the names out loud together, it's kind of interesting that Dandelion Depths is at a noticeably higher elevation than Acorn Heights. Something false advertising. Anyway, I love the bioluminescence of Dandelion Depths. It's really nice to have a route that actually cares about the underground section. And this river is still my favorite. It's shady, it's pleasant, and most importantly, it's a perfect transition into the lush biome of Acorn Heights. 13. Dry Bones Burnout to Airship Fortress. It's shocking how much variety there is on the walls of Bowser's Castle. We generally only see the same few sections of this biome. The donut, the volcano, and then those hammer bros near Airship Fortress. But on this route, we follow the castle walls in their entirety. Each section has its own enemy type to deal with, and there are so many trick opportunities, including the most convenient rail I have ever seen outside of a railroad track. And then we have all these walls just begging to be ridden on. With so many enemies and trick opportunities, this route feels like it was designed for skill expression. 12. Toad's Factory to Peach Stadium. This route ranks higher than its counterpart, not just because the true Peach Stadium is a better destination than Toad's Factory, but also because you can commandeer a giant semi-truck and cause some serious property damage on the way there. 11. Moo Meadows to Dry Bones Burnout. Sure, this version of the route doesn't have that gliding section over the meadows, but it does end with Dry Bones Burnout, which more than makes up for everything. 10. Airship Fortress to Bowser's Castle. The raw energy of this route is unmatched. The explosions announce our arrival at the Bowser's Castle biome, which always feels good, but it feels especially intentional here, where Bowser's Castle is our destination. 2 other routes from Airship Fortress use this opening, and it's still cool then, but it feels a little bit like Stolen Valor. If we're flying towards a giant volcano, then it's only right for the giant volcano to be our destination. This is the best approach to Bowser's Castle you could possibly ask for. 9. Peach Beach to Wario Shipyard. I am sorry to announce that my wholesome era has come to an end. My inner edgelord has taken control. And what that means in practice is I think Wario Shipyard, spooky and dangerous, is so much more interesting than the placid, boring Peach Beach. We still have Slifer and all the same landmarks on the way back, except this time, the looming Wario Shipyard has an actual sense of personality. The route doesn't just fizzle out at the end. 8. Wario Shipyard to Cheep Falls. The route between the coast and the shipyard is just a bit more interesting in this direction, and Cheep Falls is itself a stronger destination than Wario Shipyard, though, to be honest, it's not by much. 7. Airship Fortress to Dry Bones Burnout. Okay, I know I was just gassing up how well this section works with Bowser's Castle, but have you considered Dry Bones Burnout is just better? Like, I know we're not driving directly at the volcano, but the lava motif is consistent, and Dry Bones Burnout is an incredible track on its own. Bring it all together with that route across the castle walls, and we have something special. 6. Dandelion Depths to Cheep Falls. This is one of 2 routes that use the actual Dandelion Depths as a starting point. But while I don't think this river is quite as nice as the one to Acorn Heights, the jump from the waterfall into the middle of Cheep Falls is one of the best moments in the entire game. And of course, an extra half lap of Cheep Falls means that this route is worth picking every time. 5. Choco Mountain to Whistle Stop Summit. What a weird coincidence. Just like its reverse route, Choco Mountain to Whistle Stop Summit has a giant tornado a third of the way through the track. What are the odds of that? It's best not to question the logic of this and just enjoy the gimmick for what it is. And as expected, this route ranks way higher than its reverse for ending at Whistle Stop Summit instead of Choco Mountain. 4. Starview Peak to Wario Shipyard. Where Wario Shipyard to Starview Peak was all about climbing steadily up the mountains, this route is all about the brilliant view on the way down. The road is narrow and icy like other Starview Peak routes, but this one is unique. It's the same concept, but it feels just a little bit more challenging. Eventually, the route ends with a nice glide into the coastal biome, which lets us approach Wario Shipyard from its most exciting angle. 3. Crown City to Whistle Stop Summit. If you've seen my video praising the Mushroom Cup, you shouldn't be surprised at all by this placement. This route has it all. A robust city driving section to pay respect before our departure, a unique train yard section to foreshadow the theming and mechanics of our destination, and a final lap that feels like a true culmination of what came before. Honestly, I consider this to be the perfect route. Every route should see this as an example, something to aspire to be. There is actual game design at play here, but that does not mean it scored the highest. Number 2. DK Spaceport to Peach Stadium. This is one of the longest routes in the game, and it seems intent on proving that water routes do actually have sauce. It stands alongside the Mario Circuit to Peach Stadium route as being a 5-segment race that passes through another course halfway through, though Moo Meadows was much more prominently featured. But the main thing that sets DK Spaceport apart is the sheer commitment to spectacle. The giant DK robot starts things off on a high note, throwing giant barrels at us as we weave between his feet. The water is full of those classic flotation devices to keep the driving interesting, and then we get to glide over a flock of stingrays. The sandbar to Koopa Troopa Beach is admittedly a bit weak, but the route pulls itself together once we finally turn north. I've said before that I like Crown Bridge and Peach Stadium as set pieces in the background, but this time the route gives us vehicles and a giant whale to add some variety. It's like they're taking the coolest ideas from every route and mashing them together into one long track. And of course, no route would be complete without its ending, climbing up the hill to a fantastic Peach Stadium final lap. If you're not a big fan of water routes, I get it. You probably would not rank this route so high. But when it comes to sheer variety and celebrating the essence of the tracks it connects, this route clears. And now we're down to number 1. If you're a freak who knows all 202 routes by heart, you can process of elimination figure out what this one is. But for the rest of you, number 1, Guy Bazaar to Airship Fortress. There are other routes that start with a quick drive through a part of their departure track before heading onto the main path. None of them are quite as fun as Guy Bazaar. There are other routes with major landmarks or obstacles to avoid. None of them are as iconic as the Quicksand Pit. There are other routes with unique entrances to their destination tracks, routes that show hidden areas that you would otherwise never see. But none of those areas are quite as intriguing as Airship Fortress. And most importantly, there is no other route that manages to put anything like this together. Each unique element is already strong enough on its own to rank this course highly among its peers. But by bringing everything together, we have one route that can truly stand above the rest. So, what have we learned? Most routes aren't very good. Several months ago, when I committed to making this video, I was sincerely expecting a lot more out of this game. I knew there would be plenty of boring routes, they can't all be winners after all, but I was tantalized by the few truly great moments. The tornado, the train yard, the waterfall. Surely there would be dozens of moments like this, tucked away in the least expected corners of the map. but all I found was disappointment. Not only are we starving for memorable landmarks, but most routes barely reflect the tracks they're supposed to connect. I want this game to blur the line between where the track starts and where the road ends. The train yard on the way to Whistle Stop Summit is probably the best example of this idea in action, but alternate entrances to courses are also a great way to extend the core idea of our destination. The problem is that these instances are just so rare. They're the exception rather than the rule. These routes also need some random events to help with replayability. When you realize that most events on a route are completely scripted, it takes away a lot of the excitement of replaying it. Yes, the tornado was cool, but wouldn't it be cooler if it had like a 20% chance to show up on any given desert route? Or let's just get crazy and bring in that item box storm from Free Roam. There's a little bit of RNG with the traffic, but it very rarely affects the actual gameplay. As it stands, the random music selection at the beginning of the route has way more of an effect on replayability than anything else in this game. Mario Kart World also feels like it's a bit too scared of long routes. Mario Circuit shows us what's possible. We could totally end a route with a 3-lap course if the devs wanted us to. And our extra long routes could absolutely pass through other courses on the way to the destination. Like, passing through Moo Meadows to get to Peach Stadium is a really cool moment, and I understand why they'd want to save such a moment for the Special Cup, but there's really no reason for this to be the only time we pass through the middle of a track. There are already plenty of 4-segment routes in this game that flirt on the outskirts of middle tracks, but passing near DK Pass isn't the same as driving on DK Pass. If we're gonna have so many 4-segment routes that are clearly just 2 smaller routes stapled together, why not go all the way and drive on the middle course? It doesn't have to be all of them, just make a few routes that are a little reminiscent of Knockout Tour. But honestly, I think the core issue here is that everything is just a little bit too spread out. If every biome were as involved as Bowser's Castle, maybe we could get away with having so much space in between each track. But as it stands, this game is full of long, boring stretches, even in some of the best routes. A more compact world would necessitate more complicated level design, and hopefully, this would encourage the courses themselves to sprawl out a bit more, taking up space and making the track itself feel a little bit longer. Like, Wario Shipyard exerts way more influence in its tiny little corner of the map than Mario Bros. Circuit does with the entire Arizona biome at its fingertips. Too many destination courses feel like closed-off arenas, when they should really feel like they're bleeding into the surrounding environment. The Koopa Troopa Beach update has shown us that the devs are willing and able to update routes to make them more interesting, but I'm not sure it's going to be enough. Yes, these routes were improved immensely by just adding more stuff to do, but the devs can't just change the DNA of every single track in this big open world they've already built. The Sky High Sundae biome is never going to get bigger. The Dandelion Depths routes will never give the underground the respect it deserves. The transition from Dry Bones Burnout to Acorn Heights will always be abrupt. I hope they prove me wrong. I hope they update this game regularly and eventually fill every route with everything we could ever possibly want. I still like the concept, I just don't think they can patch out structural issues so easily. But honestly, I'm less interested in patches and more interested in seeing where they take this idea next. I don't know if it'll be a sequel in 10 years or a DLC island or what, but I would love to see this routes concept improved upon. Give us a smaller world where the tracks are more deeply connected, and fill those tracks with alternate entrances and paths that pass straight through them. Design routes and biomes that are so compact and so busy that they feel like they're actually building up to their destination track. Mario Kart World was a risky idea that Nintendo played a little too safe. At its core, the routes across an interconnected world are a strong idea, and we've seen enough great routes to know that this idea works. And maybe that's why it's so frustrating that so many routes are so aggressively mediocre. This game is refusing to reach its full potential. It's not a bad game at all. It's just unrealized. And you just realized that you're not subscribed yet. I spent way too long on this video and I desperately need to see a number go up, so if you're interested in helping out with that, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure we could work something out. But even if not, I've gotta say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. It actually means so much to me.